Hello and welcome to the Bonfire Nexus, Episode 1. Feel free to sit around the fire with friends and enjoy this conversation relating to gaming news. With me are my main host, Michael.
Hello.
And we have Alex as well.
Good evening.
My name is Dan. We'll be having a conversation today relating to all sorts of subjects of gaming, but today we decided to really go down with gaming protagonists in particular.
You can follow us on any social media with the tag The Bonfire Nexus. You could also reach out to our email at thebonfirenexus@gmail.com. Any questions that you have for us, we might, return to you and have that on a future episode. So, as Daniel said, our topic for today is going to be best video game protagonists of all time.
They don't exist.
We will get to that in a second. But before that, what have you been playing, Dan?
Well, I mean, as of the time of this recording, Monster Hunter just came out, and that's going to be probably the biggest argument for me not having a favorite anime protagonist. Anime? What am I talking about? Gaming protagonist. Yeah, I just really clicked into like the whole anime protagonist meme there. With gaming, I tend to play games that are more focused on just like the blank slate character, like Monster Hunter, which is what I've been playing recently. So this will be a very interesting subject, I think, for me to hear you guys out on. But Monster Hunter Wilds has been pretty incredible so far. I'm looking forward to probably getting to the end game and putting just as much hours as I did in World, which was somewhere around 2000. So that's what I've been doing.
I've been really, really enjoying it. The only thing so far there's been two main issues I've personally had with it. One is, the main thing for a lot of people, performance. It's not awful for me, where I don't dip under 30 FPS, but
Ooh.
We are talking about Capcom. They have a lot of money. World was a great success, right?
It's also $70 at launch, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but World ran like kind of like garbage too when it first came out. I don't know.
But you would think they would try to
I've had better experience
on that, right?
I've had better experience with Wilds performance wise than I have with Worlds, even when it comes to accessibility. As one of the few people that has an ultra wide, because it seems like nobody has an ultra wide anymore. They've released with ultra wide support, and not a lot of games do that anymore. Worlds took almost like 5 months to release it. It was a ridiculously long time, and even like recent games like Space Marine 2 had to wait for ultra wide support. And I have pretty good like time running at above 30 frames. I run usually at a steady 60, and my computer hasn't been upgraded since 2018, bar the graphics card, which I updated last year. So I've had the opposite experience, but that doesn't really exactly speak to the general consensus. So if most people are having issues with it, then I think that's a worthy point of criticism.
So this is actually my first time dipping into Monster Hunter. I did play the beta, at the behest of my very close friends. They're like, you should try it out. So I'll be full up front. I'm not super into a lot of games that like are directly published by Japanese companies, and it's not because they're Japanese or anything.
That's
like
exactly
that.
why.
It's more so. Yeah, no. They have certain similarities that maybe just didn't click with me, or I didn't experience. I grew up with like Halo and shit, right? Yeah. So naturally, my experience is going to be more like Western based. My first RPGs were Skyrim, Elder Scrolls, like Fallout. So things that came out of the States or Western developers. So that's just kind of like the lexicon I know. That being said, at their encouragement, I've been trying new things. I tried the Yakuza series. I tried Monster Hunter for the first time now. I'm enjoying it. So for performance-wise, the beta I tried, and my God, that shit did not run well.
No.
I'm talking like PS2 polygon characters, and that was at like lower graphics. So I was like, okay, I like the concept of the game so far. Again, no experience with the franchise prior. I was told that it started on PS2 and then went to like the DS, 3DS or something.
PSP and all that.
Crazy history. So I want to hear a little more about what you guys feel about the games so far, for sure. But I did play the game proper yesterday. And I got to do like 2 or 3 hunts. One, I like the gameplay. I got Sword and Shield because I thought it was simple, like learn easy. Yeah. easy to learn, hard to master, maybe with a word there, but even then it felt like pretty easy to pick up. The one thing I will say is the UI navigation was not fun.
Yeah, are you specifically talking about your inventory?
Yeah, like having to go with the D-pad and everything and the hold and release.
Yeah, it's a downgrade from World in my opinion. There are some things that make it easier, but it's not intuitive. And as somebody who's played a lot of Monster Hunter, this is not my first title. It definitely seems kind of like if it wasn't broke, don't fix it, and they just made it worse because of that. I think World had like the best. Even with like the radial release thing, it was kind of wonky, but especially as a Sword and Shield player, the biggest buff of that weapon is the fact that you can use items without having to sheath your weapon. And that makes it so that things like the UI really matter to you, because the more accessible that you can be about installing your slingers or putting down bombs or using potions, that directly contributes to what makes Sword and Shield so good. And if the UI isn't intuitive, which I don't think it is as good as it is in World, then you are directly affected by that UI change as a Sword and Shield user. So I definitely understand that.
There's a lot of stuff that's kind of just hidden in like menus on menus on menus.
Yeah,
which is like really
I guess like I have to learn the rhythm is how I feel about this game. In regards to story, is it important? Like, does it matter?
No.
Not really.
No.
That was going to be my second point. Not the story itself, but one of the things I've noticed that I've really hated so far, because it's a gameplay focused franchise, is that there is just so many sections where they just take control from you, where it's just like your secret's moving by yourself. You are, just slowly moving along, just listening to this very like kind of generic and like mundane dialogue, which frankly, like I tried to give it a chance, and I couldn't really get into the story that well. I just did not care about most of the characters, right?
Really?
And personally, yeah, and it just felt very frustrating where it's like, okay, let's go explore the forest, and it's like, cool, let's go, and then I finally get control back and I take a turn, right? And the scout flies, I remember this one particular moment too. The scout flies were actually like kind of headed that way, like towards like I guess the waypoint we were going to, but it was not like the path that the game wanted me to go to. So it like automatically auto moved me back towards like the NPCs, towards this one specific path that goes around, so they can have a conversation about the scenic, like the scenery and all that stuff around there. And I'm just like, man, I'm here to hunt monsters, not talk about. I mean, it is cool, like pointing out certain things about the forest, and it's stuff that like I feel like over time you would have noticed, but when it's just like shoved in your face and it takes like up to 5 minutes of you just there, it's just like, man, I just want to fight some things, man. That's what I'm here to do personally. And like I said, for a gameplay focused franchise to kind of just take control away from you, which at least from my experience, World didn't really do that too much, was a little frustrating for me.
So before I get into my point of view on that, Alex, do you feel the same way as like a newer player to the Monster Hunter franchise?
So it threw me in, and so I was told that the story is tutorial, basically. It's an extended tutorial to get you into the late game, which I imagine has the really like intrinsic boss fights and kind of set pieces that you expect from this series. Again, I don't really have a lot of context. It's not like I watched any YouTube videos or anything. I went in on the recommendation, more or less blind, understanding that this is a game about getting into big, cool boss fights. So yeah, I get that, right? You meet this character, she's the blacksmith. You meet this character, she's the trainer. This character makes the weapons or provisions your food or whatever. I maybe feel they don't express the importance of those things. And that's something that has to be learned as a player from other players, kind of like that MMO style of like teaching, where you're expected to engage and learn a little bit, which is fine, right? I'm cool with that. I think that's a great way to do it, especially if the game is so focused on multiplayer and cooperative play. I question if there's a need for an open world, or at least like a map like that, if the point is the game's just going to take you where you need to go.
Yeah.
When you go do a hunt.
So
yeah. So
To give my input on this, because I'm in the complete opposite side of the spectrum, and the reason that I really wanted to get into this point is because I was browsing the internet and I saw a post about somebody having the same sentiment, that the game feels very handholdy. And maybe I'm speaking as somebody who's one, dumped a bunch of hours into Monster Hunter as a whole, and two, into World. I think that Wilds is trying to kind of open up the game into like the more open world things that other people appreciate, like yourself, Mike. I'm not much of an open world guy. I tend to just like a straight kind of train tracks game with a lot of story. And Monster Hunter is more about like the flashiness and the intense boss fight, this one on one kind of duel thing. So when people say that the game is kind of handholdy, I don't think it's much of a problem, at least in the story, because you're doing the story, right? Like it's there to try to lead you to one place so that you can have this one task to do. And the game does have a lot of times where it asks you, like, hey, are you ready to continue the story? Are you geared up and ready to go hunt this monster? If not, it doesn't really hold your hand and it still lets you explore the world. I have heard things that like some monsters are barred, but I haven't really looked into that too much.
Yeah, I did experience that once.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
was one time I was coming back from I think it was the Doshugama fight. And then I saw one of the what are they called? The Balaharas, I think
Yeah,
they're
that's what
called.
I saw on the internet. People were
Yeah,
saying that
like
that
if you
fight
go
was
to
barred.
try to fight it at that point, it says, "Hey, you're not authorized to fight this monster." And I
Yeah.
was like, "What?"
I so like I think that's a thing that Monster Hunter is kind of having growing pains, in the sense that it's never been an open world game before in this sense. You were able to go out on expeditions and fight monsters, but a lot of those expeditions didn't even have the monsters spawn into the world, right? Whereas Wild is trying to be like, hey, look at that thing that you can potentially fight if you get farther into the story. But I never really felt like, at least as somebody who's played a lot of Monster Hunter, it's never been this way before, in the sense that there's a monster out there just kind of doing whatever. So the fact that the game allows you to even go out and do things that aren't just like load into this quest, fight this monster, get out of the quest, it lets you to continuously hunt like the Gilding Lands, for those of the people that have played World, and let you go into the open world end game area. I think that it's doing a very good job in reducing all those load screens. Like if you've ever played Generations Ultimate, it has a lot of load screens in between areas. World did a really good job at taking that out, and now Wilds is trying to make it so that you don't even have to go through loading screens, so to speak, right? Like you just traditionally hunt a monster and keep going. I think that's going to be a lot more evident in the end game, and since this game just came out, people might feel this way now. But Monster Hunter, I think, has been and will continue to be all about the end game grind, and it will feel a lot less handholdy then, because at that point you might be in the open world saying that you want to farm this monster, and then a monster comes out of nowhere and then starts beating your face in. And at that point, I think it will feel more like an open world game, much like all the other Monster Hunters in the past have. I think for those who have played Wilds, the end game area, the Gilding Lands, is a perfect interpretation of how this game is going to run at the end game. Like when people are max level, where you just go monster after monster after monster after monster, and then the bigger monsters are going to be quests, kind of like Safijiva and Kovateroth. But that's just the experience I think that newer players to this franchise are starting to realize. And that's because Wilds and Worlds were like the gateway, right? Those are the things that got a lot of people into Monster Hunter, because many people had the same issues of, convoluted UI, or too much loading screen, or the game felt really clunky. Wilds is the next step to moving that forward to a more general player base. It's just a matter that you have a lot of people who came from something like, say, Elden Ring, where it was completely free and open, to something that's a little train tracked to keep the tradition of old Monster Hunter games. But I think it's going to open up a little bit later.
So for me, I just want to clarify. I don't think I don't have issues with it like being train tracked of like, hey, this is the monster we want you to hunt. Here's some story. Here's what we want you to do. That I have no issues with. I guess what I'm gonna compare it to like something like GTA. You get in a car with somebody, right? There's a lot of story and dialogue that you are, that's happening there, right? But the game lets you drive to the destination yourself. While it does the story exposition and all that stuff, it still gives you agency, where there are portions, and there are significant portions of the game where I just set the controller down. It's not a cutscene, it's in game, but it's like not interesting enough story wise where I want to listen and care. And there's just nothing I'm doing besides just being there, and it's just like very minimal like value in my opinion being added. um like I said, I think it's fine that they don't let you hunt certain monsters until you get to a certain point, or it's handholdy in certain aspects. Because, like you said, definitely know that once you get to that end game, it's like just go off and do your own thing, right? But
Yeah.
at least so far, there's just some sections where I feel frustrated. Where I'm like, dude, I just want to fight the next monster, and I'm forced to listen to
Yeah.
all of this.
I think what you're kind of looking for is something interesting when you're being train tracked to go from point A to point B, which I think is a good criticism. I don't think
Yeah,
that's
for
entirely
sure.
wrong.
And it's like I'm used to games where, I mean, shit, I've been playing through Final Fantasy X, and a third of that game is cutscenes, you know. But it's just like, but it's like it's interesting, and I care about the characters enough and the story where it's just like, yeah, give me more. Like I'm never upset that a cutscene happens, right? Where like in Monster Hunter, there's like so much potential if they did want to focus on story there. If we do want to focus on story, give me like a kind of more gritty, like kind of hard hitting, something that like I can attach to these characters. But for the most part, like Alex was kind of saying, it's like this is the blacksmith character, this is your handler, this is the provisions character. Yes, they're not like completely one note where that's all they talk about, and they kind of have like, you know, their own like I guess personalities, but it's not like, I guess, deep enough where I'm like, oh, this is a very nuanced character that I should care about.
Yeah, they try. I mean, at the very beginning, they introduced you to like 2 or 3 kids, and they're like, "Oh, you should care about
Yeah,
these children."
Nata's really
How
hard
could
to
this
care
little
about.
boy?
Yeah,
I'm
I
like,
always skip talking
is
about
there
it.
actual narrative payoff to this? Is he gonna turn evil if I don't? I'm so conditioned by other RPGs, and I guess, and I don't even know if this qualifies as an RPG.
In a way, it does. I think it's just.
I would say so. I would say so.
I think Monster Hunter is just right now kind of caught in the zeitgeist of a bunch of players from other genres coming into it, and they're tempering those expectations with this game that's still trying to keep some sense of tradition in it, even though it's completely going outside what it's normally known for.
So I do want to say I'm going into this without like expectations.
That's fair. No, so
right?
I think you have a very good criticism in that regard, because I'm being obviously a little biased with how much Monster Hunter I've played in the past. There's some
Right.
elements I think that are interesting. Like most people won't get it, I think, but the fact that like Alma gives you authorization to fight a monster, I think is kind of cool. A lot of people come into Monster Hunter thinking, I kill the dragon because I want to, I skin it and then make it into a hat, right? Monster Hunter has a thing where the guild is trying to reduce invasive species. That's why you're killing these monsters, because they're fucking up with the environment. And it's cool to see that they're trying to add more of that by giving you restrictions and acceptances to take these quests, and therefore cull the environment of things that are seen as hazardous, which Alma always giving you authorization. A lot of people are like memeing on that, but to me it's like a very important gameplay or story aspect of the game, because that's never really been said before except for accepting the quest. So I think like little things like that are neat, but you're right, it doesn't do a very good job of explaining it, both the story elements and the like more intrinsic mechanics, which I know is one of the things that turned in particular you, Mike, away from World. You thought that the game was a little bit too convoluted.
I just thought it didn't really give you the proper explanations for a lot of stuff, like Alex was saying, where it's just more like I have to learn this from other people.
Yeah.
Whereas the game didn't fully explain a lot of things, which I feel like with Wilds has been, in my opinion, at least from what I've noticed, been kind of an upgrade. Like there were certain things that they were actually explaining, and I'm like, I don't remember this being explained in World. But I guess to give you, Alex, also, I try to get into World, and put like 50 hours into it with like 2 different characters. I think I'm like 2 or 3 monsters away from beating like the main story. And I just couldn't really get into it too much. And especially knowing how much a lot of our friends like really love Monster Hunter, I really wanted to get into it because it just seems like a Michael-ass game too. You know, just fucking fight some giant-ass, cool-ass bosses with some sick-ass weapons and movesets, right? Customization, RPG, like, you know, just amazing. And I've always loved the vibes, and the monster designs too are fucking sick.
That is very cool. Yeah, really well impressed by the versatilities. I don't know. I've been told that some of them are like, what's the word? They're coming back, right, from
Like
other
returning
games.
monsters, yeah.
Yeah, returning monsters. And again, I don't really have the knowledge base to be able to like back that up, but these feel like unique to this, and just the narrative context that it gave me. The impression I got was that like we're going to be encountering completely new things for the franchise. So I want to know what you guys' thoughts, because you've played more than me for sure.
So it's not really much of a spoiler. I think it's fine to say, wow, Rathalos is in a Monster Hunter game, guys. Big fucking surprise. But I did recently encounter Rathalos, and even for a monster that's been in the franchise for literal years at this point, when you did fight him in Wilds, I was like, this is really freaking cool. Like, it continues to amaze me how they introduce monsters in these games, especially with like how Worlds and Wilds has evolved the franchise. And it's still like I'm soy jacking and pointing at my screen, you know what I mean? Like I know a lot of like one of the biggest returning monsters for me is Gore Magala, and I think when you guys get to him, you're gonna understand exactly why people like that monster a lot. And it's cool that it's again a franchise that I think is opening up to a plethora of gamers that would not play that game, while also still catering to systems and intricacies that a lot of returning Monster Hunter players like. Like, I know there's a big criticism about getting into the game and all of its systems. It doesn't explain it very well, or it's very convoluted. I'm not going to deny that point, but it is something that I enjoy. I think that Monster Hunter is a franchise that you have to get like go head first into and really devote yourself. It's not a game that you can just pick up, play, and say, "Hey, this is very cool," like Space Marine 2. That's one of the criticisms that game has, is that it's like it's really cool and flashy, but after that you kind of just drop it. And I think that that's the game. That game was made to do that. Whereas Monster Hunter is a game that it doesn't make much sense.
The opposite, right?
Yeah, the more you start figuring it out yourself, even though it doesn't explain it very well, I think it's very rewarding when you start putting all these things together. And that's what makes that game have like 2,000 hours in my playlist. Where say a game like Devil May Cry 5 is a game that I've played for maybe 50 hours and then dropped. Right? It doesn't have that appeal to me.
So I will say I am excited for the cooperative reason of I love those moments in co-op games, especially where you are on the back foot and it is that like last second clutch or those last few hits where you're not 100% sure you're going to make it. And you've tried this once or twice or three times already. So I can definitely see that happening a lot in this game to exciting degree, because even in the beta, we tried like the hardest one
build?
and like we didn't win.
The Unchained
I think
Art
so.
Build, right?
Yeah. We just literally ran up to it and they're like, the beta's ending in 17 minutes. Let's see if we can beat it that quick.
Good luck.
That fight was super fucking cool, man.
We didn't, but just the idea that is a possibility.
I think that's one of the beacons of Monster Hunter, is being on that back foot, and they only go farther and farther. Like when Iceborne came out and they introduced Safi Jiva, that monster, when people saw him basically spirit bomb the field where you had to hide behind the craters, or like Alatreon, where if you didn't make that skill check to break his horns, he would just immediately wipe the party. There was a lot of moments where you don't know if you're going to make it, and when you see that horn break, you're just like a sigh of relief knowing that you still have a chance in this fight. And I think Monster Hunter is one of those games that like you're always at the edge of your chair, you're always in the back foot, but like the combined either knowledge of you knowing how to make a build or you and your friends kind of covering each other has made this franchise only get better. And in particular in Wilds, because like at the end of World, if for anyone who has fought Fatalis, me as a Lance main, you would know that the Lance can hold his shield up and completely bar off the Fatalis's fire breath, and your party can hide behind you. That's a mechanic that is exclusively like available to Lance, really, because they're the only ones with a good enough guard skill to do that. Other players would probably die or get put down to half health and immediately die after. So a lot of this cooperation where you're saying that you're in the back foot and each teammate kind of brings their own point forward, right? Like a hammer player is consistently knocking down the monster with head attacks. The longsword player is cutting off the tail and maybe getting a stagger hit in. The hunting horn is giving you some buffs, and the lance player is keeping aggro on the monster. Like they just continue to add elements to the game, and I think that Worlds has finally captured, I think, so to speak, Miyazaki's Elden Ring. You know how he says that this is so close to my vision of what I want my game to be? I think Wilds has finally evolved to what Monster Hunter is supposed to be.
Even for like aspects like that, like the cooperative thing for single player, I had a moment the other night too where it was just like I was fighting the Raidao. I, like a dumbass, didn't restock up on my potions.
Yeah.
So I only had a couple left. And I got him to the point where the skulls were coming out that, he's about to die and everything. And I was really low on health, and I remember that he like I think he did like the little taser attack where he like kind of gets the horns out and then does like a little stab at you
Yeah.
with it, and I just decided to say fuck it and like did I was charging up because I play Charge Blade, and I normally like to do the Savage Axe gameplay, but I did the SAED move, and like just doing that like all or nothing where I'm like, if I do it I cart whatever, and just getting that hit in right before he hits me, and it was like the final hit I needed to kill him.
Yeah,
Was like,
it's,
holy
oh my
shit.
God,
Like, you know, I was just like, fuck.
like, come on,
dude.
go!
Like, yeah, I was just, yeah, it's so fucking awesome, man. Despite some criticisms I have of the game, I've been loving it. And like I mentioned before, I tried to get into World. I couldn't. But Wilds, I'm bought in. I'm like the Danny DeVito meme where he's like, I get it now. Crying and everything. You know? So that, it's been like really fucking amazing. And I'm enjoying every single moment I have with the game.
I'm glad that a lot of people are finally getting into it as like a longtime Monster Hunter fan. That finally, like a large portion of my friend group finally wants to play the game.
Yeah,
and
it kind of feels like it's like their Elden Ring, like you said,
Mhm.
where it's just like there's a bunch of people who couldn't get into Dark Souls, Sekiro, Bloodborne. Then they play Elden Ring, and they're like, "Shit, this is what I've been missing out on." Like, you know.
Did you see the Steam charts, Alex, on Monster Hunter's play rate on release day?
It's like
heard
something
it, like,
ridiculous, right?
It went
It was
crazy.
like, I think, a
high.
million
Like,
concurrent
it topped
players.
Baldur's Gate. It topped like the big names from last year, especially this year too. So it's crazy. I can see why. 100%. It is a cool action game from what I've seen so far, and it's something that definitely encourages you to grab a couple friends, encourage them to get it as well. And for the cost too, I mean, that's impressive that they were able to do it. I know a lot of people are still very hesitant about that $70 price tag.
Yeah.
I personally didn't purchase it. I'm definitely mooching off of someone in my Steam.
and as
works most of the time that I'm playing. So
as a longtime player of the Monster Hunter games, specifically the last three, like Rise and World, they always seem to release one giant DLC afterwards. And I can promise you that thing is going to be absolutely amazing. It seems like whenever they do release the second part of the game, as people like to quote, it's just what you thought they couldn't top, they managed to do it. Like Iceborne, I think, was the best expansion I have ever played in any game in my entire life. Iceborne was just totally worth that, like, I think $30 to $40 price tag, because it was basically an entire game on top of that, and they just continue to add free stuff. That's the other good thing I think that makes Monster Hunter worth it, is that, yeah, you're paying $70, but there's like really no season pass, so to speak, and they just continue to add monsters for free, and then you buy the DLC and it's like an entire other game on top of that. So
they have those crossover events too, right?
Oh yeah, I saw they had a Witcher.
Yeah, the
3
Leshen. Oh my God, that was World. The Leshen was brutal.
World.
But to put in perspective, like Savage Axe, the mode that you like to play, Mike, that didn't exist in base World. That was introduced in the expansion, right? A lot of things that changed the game were introduced in Iceborne, and then they were built upon in Rise, and now they're like, I think, in their final form, so to speak, in Wilds, which is what's making the game so amazing. Is that it's just build up after build up after build up, and then you can see how the game has evolved over the years. If that's anything to go by, the expansion for Wilds is going to add even more game-changing systems that I think is going to sink its teeth into the player base more.
I'm really excited to get through the main story and start, I guess, getting that grind going, and start playing with you guys. Despite, like, the issues that it has, I feel like it's stuff that can be iterated on and fixed over time, like the performance stuff.
Yeah, that's a matter of time, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Because World, like you said, I also read was pretty bad on launch too, performance wise.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
But now it's like running smoothly from when I've played it. So hopefully they can do the same thing with Wilds there, and hopefully they kind of fix their multiplayer stuff too, because that stuff is still kind of head scratching. Like,
yeah, it's a bit weird, the link system. That's not something that was in the old games.
There's like 3 different ways to play with your friends, and all of them serve a different function. And it's just like, why do I need to read this document on how to play with my friends? It's almost like friend code adjacent, you know? Like it's just like, why can't I just click on like search them by their name, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is what it is.
But I think with 30 minutes of Monster Hunter Wilds glazing, which is very much deserved, I think can go into our main topic for today, which was anime or not. God damn it! I keep saying anime protagonists, game protagonists, and one of the things that I think I have a bit of a hot take, at least with the games that I play, is with a really good example being Monster Hunter. I don't really tend to have one because I play a lot of games like Monster Hunter that have like kind of blank protagonists that I can't really go back and recall like what my favorite one is, because I wouldn't go ahead and say, oh, my favorite protagonist is the hunter from the Monster Hunter series. I don't think that's fair. Right.
Well, hold on, because I do think that is a valid idea, and it presents the question to you when it comes to like a more traditional RPG, right? You are given a blank character, but the character is a blank slate because you're supposed to insert yourself into it.
So now, I'm the best protagonist. Got it.
Yeah, pretty much, right? So even if it is like there's still a character in the world, right? It's meant to be your immediate control. So like we can compare Commander Shepard from the Mass Effect series. I think we're going to want to talk about him a lot because him and her, of course. I know they're both very
Femshep.
Yeah, Femshep is beloved. Melshep is great too. Or like Geralt of Rivia, right? So these are molded characters in that they have a backstory already, and they are characters separate from the player that the player is just kind of experiencing the narrative with, right? Versus something like, let's take another BioWare game, Dragon Age Origins, where you specifically are the character. They call him the Warden in Dragon Age Origins, and the great thing about that game, if you guys haven't played it, is that you play the character's tragic backstory.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so that's what the Origins portion is, and I encourage you guys to try it out if you can. I remember it being like a very big
thing when it released. A lot of people were freaking out about it.
So if I can do the math on this real quick, I think there's 5 or 6 Origins. Each of them is, I want to say, about 40 minutes in length that you play through, and it gives you context and motivation for your character down the line, right? And Dragon Age Origins, fantastic narrative RPG, just from the get-go. I think it's like it it outdoes every other Dragon Age game in that regard. But back to the protagonist, in that the Warden is you. You are given a last name and a race that you still pick. The last name is the only thing you don't really pick, and that pretty much determines how the world is going to see you through the rest of the game, right? So is that too much for you, or is that like, I think I can put myself in there and play that?
I think it's fine. It's not to say that like growing up, I didn't have like favorite game protags, but it's more so that like I don't really identify with one. With I think what the subject matter of today's topic is. I think an interesting way to probably go down the list here is to hear your guys's like top game protags, and then maybe try to like mold as to what my outlook might be on one of them, and see if I agree with you guys or not. So maybe bounce off what your protags are, and then I'll kind of see like, okay, maybe I can draw a conclusion from that and see if they're one of my favorites. Like if I was to, the only one that I can think of that's like a named character that is probably one of my favorite protags is probably Samus from the Metroid series. And Samus is, yes, they have like a backstory and stuff, but for the most part, through the games that you play with them, I mean, most people
blank slate.
Yeah, right? Like most people didn't even know they were a female until the end of the game, right? Like they thought that like, oh wow, Samus took off her suit and it's actually a chick. And I know a lot of people like when she became very popular in her Zero suits, in like the kind of the Brawl era when like Metroid Zero Mission came out, I only really liked Samus because it was a quiet bounty hunter that was like kick ass, right? That's the only thing I like about Samus. A lot of people tend to be like, oh, but she's hot like Lara Croft. I really don't care for that. I like the fact that she's kind of like Link in the sense of like has a backstory, is a developed character, but for the most part they have one objective, which is, you know, in Metroid, usually kill the Metroids, at least depending on what Metroid game you're playing, or like Link is kind of like go defeat Ganon, right? There's not like a super big backstory to them. They've been adding it throughout time, and I think if anything, Metroid Zero M is a very good indicator of why that's kind of bad for the character, because Metroid Zero M was seen as one of the, or Zero M, Metroid the other M was seen as a kind of flop, and that's a lot. There's a lot of reasons why that game flopped, but kind of giving Samus a more fleshed look I think took away from her character more than anything. As if they were to try to give Link like a super intricate story, you know what I mean? But even for the
Link
most
can talk now.
yeah, right. Well, that's in the other Dread they made Samus talk Chozo, which is like the alien race that raised her, and I thought that was like kind of cool. It was just enough to keep her character as like I'm this silent, confident bounty hunter, but not enough to like try to go into a realm like the other M where it kind of broke that thing that I really liked about her. The thing that speaks to me the most about Samus, if you've ever played Dread, is that when she's fighting these monsters, like you could tell that she has this confidence about her, like in the way that she walks, in the way that she handles it, in the way that she fights, that makes it like that's what I like about her, right? And she doesn't need to talk to do that. And I think that that's a very impressive way for you to show that character in terms of how they carry themselves without even communicating a single piece of dialogue until the very end of the game in another alien language, right? I think like that's probably the only character that I really care for. But to put
So I've got a question.
yeah.
Why do you hate Master Chief in Halo? That now,
Master Chief
everything
talks,
you
right?
just described is
fight?
basically
But Master
like,
Chief talks.
why a lot of people love
Master Chief.
He talks,
does
but not
talk.
like a great extent.
So
Like,
okay,
he'll say,
Talks
like,
a little too much.
so
Yeah.
I'm gonna assume that you have Master Chief in your top pro tags, right?
Both
okay.
of us do.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
as somebody
Yeah.
who didn't grow up with the Halo series, the one thing that I never liked about the Halo series is that it took itself in a really goofy direction while also trying to be serious. Now, I don't have enough experience to validate this, right? But at least every single time I play, I see those stupid little triangle guys running around and
grunts?
Yeah, they're just running around and screaming, and the elites are like, "Oh!" like whenever they die, and I'm
Yeah.
like, "This game is so goofy, but it's trying to tell me that it's serious." And I just that's always one. I didn't grow up with Xbox, so there's that. I never
Yeah.
really got to play it, but we did play Halo 2 together, and I just kind of was like, okay, this is all right. Like I never understood the craze for Halo, so like maybe you can give some insight as to why Master Chief is like this super beloved character that everyone gets super emotional for. Because I remember a lot of people really liked like the Believe trailer when they saw Master Chief holding that
Mhm.
grenade in that last scene where I think the elite or whatever is holding him up. I was like, I don't really care. You know what I mean? Maybe you could draw some
Yeah.
insight as to
you
why.
want to take this one,
So-
Alex?
Yeah, I'll start it off by saying that I think Master Chief became, he's not necessarily a silent protagonist, but he's a step up
Yeah.
from that. If we look at shooters of the time, right, we can look at like Half-Life, where there is an like explicitly silent protagonist. And I guess Half-Life, you could say, is a touch more serious than like Halo is. But to get back to Master Chief, it's because it is supposed to be the power fantasy, right? It is supposed to be you, the player, can see yourself in Master Chief's armor. And like, yeah, the grunts and the elites are a little goofy, but that's by design because they're supposed to kind of cower before
Yeah.
you. They're not really supposed to be presented as like this insurmountable challenge. Maybe to the average human, and you can empathize with that, especially since you have the Marine allies fighting with you. And they can be pretty fragile, even to like grunts, right? So just fighting alongside them, and like in the context of this universe where humanity is in a war that's fully stacked against it, I think Halo 3's Believe was so impactful because a lot of the other marketing around it was showing that like you're on the back foot
Yeah,
here.
it felt like
the
a
Chief is
call to
losing,
arms
he's
in a way.
captured. Yeah, right. So there's the very famous ones where it's like a whole battle diorama you're going through, and then you have like veterans of the war explaining their experience.
Yeah.
To speak to that point, though, I will say one thing. At the time Halo 1 did come out, the AI was pretty like significant at that time.
It
I
still
remember,
is.
Yes, like the elites and everything, even though they are a little like quirky with their noises and everything, they are like pretty intelligent. And I mean, shooters today can learn from the very first Halo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like how the enemies react and everything.
I think Combat Evolved was like basically a catalyst to. I mean, it's attributed as one of the most revolutionary first-person shooter games, and it's
Mhm.
because of the
multiple aspects.
right, and it's because of the systems that the game introduced into like the gaming sphere, so to speak. So I will always credit Halo with being revolutionary, but it's just never been enough to kind of rein me in and make me a super fan. Me wearing my Halo 3 T-shirt while I go out with my buddies at the bar or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. A lot of the marketing was very
Yeah, no,
impactful,
I
though,
mean,
which
like,
is why I think
I
it got
think
up.
it definitely shows its strength of the fact that I've seen all of this advertisement for Halo 3 when it was coming out, and I wanted to get into Halo 3. It couldn't be done because I was a kid that couldn't afford an Xbox 360.
Hmm.
But I mean, Halo
Yeah,
definitely had the power to influence at least me seeing it while not even caring for it. And I think that it's like, I wanted to play it like 100%. I still kind of wish that I was into Halo, but I understand that like the game is definitely revolutionary for what it is.
yeah.
I think going back to it, like how you were talking about how you didn't grow up to it or with it. I think going back to those games with how, like, I guess how many strides were made in the FPS genre as a whole, um, it is a little harder. Whereas, like, I grew up like one of the very first, not one, like literally probably one of the first 10 games I've played was Halo Combat Evolved.
Hmm.
And I grew up playing Halo. Halo was like the FPS for me for the longest time. So going back to those games, there's like a nostalgia to it, and it still feels great.
Right.
But I definitely could see how if you didn't grow up with it, and you go back and you're like, I mean, I guess it's okay, right? Where it's like at that time there was kind of nothing like it.
Yeah.
Shit, I remember like tagging along with my cousin, and he would have friends in his apartment, like his apartment building in New York, and everybody would just go to somebody's apartment and hook up their Xboxes and just LAN
The
party.
LAN party, yeah.
And yeah, it
Yeah.
was like the dopest thing, bringing people together like that. And then with Halo 2, kind of showing consoles can also do online multiplayer, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff where it's just like kind of had to be there for that to be a monumental thing.
It's like a product
but
of its time, so to speak. Because I know I tried introducing you to Metroid, the Prime series in particular, and you didn't have much interest to try to like, you didn't like the urge wasn't there, and I felt the same way about
yeah,
Halo, where it's just like I'm sure at the time Halo 2 was fucking incredible, but like for me that revolutionary game was Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, and much like me with Halo, you couldn't really get into it like that either. But do you think? I mean, I guess a question for both of you: do you think that Master Chief as a character was the one that really solidified your opinion on Halo, or was it more like everything around the franchise, like LAN parties or online multiplayer and stuff like that?
I think it was the latter there, where I mean this. So one of my first games of like Mike was Halo
Yeah.
2, right? So I think the third mission, you hop in a tank and you blow shit up on a bridge. I don't really care that it was Master Chief because I was so young. I was maybe 3 or 4. So it just shows like how young I got started with this game and how impactful it
But
was for me.
how does Master
But
Chief tie into your why you think that he's one of
I
the best
fucking love
protagonists?
his armor. I'm gonna be
It's
honest.
the-
I was obsessed with his armor when I was
the
a
armor.
kid. Yeah.
It's incredibly cool design. Just a super soldier shoot. The fact that he's got like higher endurance, he can beat the crap out of the aliens with his fists, and you can dual wield and everything. Is that he is the perfect avatar to become an action hero in the universe of Halo.
So was he more of like a conduit for you to put yourself into his armor, or was he more of
Yeah,
like
kinda like what Alex was
that was
saying.
exactly the intention.
Yeah.
It's because Halo at its core is a power fantasy because you are a super soldier and you are fighting enemies which are technologically more strong. Like some of them are physically stronger than you too. The elites are meant to be your equals, but you still mow through waves of them, even on like the highest difficulties. You're meant to fight through dozens of these, and they're supposed to be even stronger then. So it's gratifying to be in the shoes of someone like Master Chief, even if his depth of character isn't really like incredibly
I guess that's
deep.
kind of what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like whoa, he's not waxing poetic every other cutscene. In fact, he barely says words.
Stay too brute.
Because
But the
Yeah,
fact that like when he does cool stuff in Combat Evolved, especially, it's not in a cutscene. It is you doing
Yeah.
it, the player
Uh-huh.
doing it, right? Halo 2, I think, takes that up a little bit in 1 or 2 cutscenes, but still, when you're dual wielding, you are dual wielding. You're the one shooting both
Yeah.
guns. When you're hijacking a vehicle, you are the one who clicked the button prompt, got in there, and you go third person there, so you see Chief doing it. So it is shoes for the player to fill, and you are welcomed into those shoes in an incredibly gratifying way. And that's just a beacon to rally behind. It kind of goes for the other protagonists of the Halo games too, like the Rookie and Noble 6, who are for ODST and Reach, respectively. And then by that point, right, the point we're kind of entering the modern era of Halo, which has been disappointing for a lot of fans. Um, Chief never really felt like he was bad at any point. Because he had already just this legend behind him. You couldn't take away what you accomplished in Halo 1, 2, and 3. So, and I will give credit to 343 Industries, to the people who don't like them. I think the intention and execution for his arc in Infinite was good. Mike, did you play Infinite's story?
I have not.
You have not? Okay. So it's an inverse, because his relationship with Cortana is also important in these games.
Yeah.
And it was exacerbated by Halo 4, which is controversial, but again, you can argue like it was this a good choice or a bad choice to give Master Chief more humanity, where Cortana is no longer in the narrative as we know it in Halo Infinite. She's been replaced by a like copy of her who is more naive to the world. So whereas Cortana was a tool to introduce the player to the galaxy and help guide the actions of the narrative, it's reversed in Halo Infinite, where the Master Chief is now the one who knows about what's going on and can ground this like new AI character, while they still maintain some dynamics. So he's become the teacher, so to speak.
It's interesting how you note the fact that like Master Chief was more of a conduit for you to do all these cool things, and that you kind of built the character of Master Chief by playing the games, because that's originally the idea that I came into this conversation having, that Samus was more of a blank slate. But the more I remember about playing, say, the first Metroid game I ever played was Zero Mission, and then followed by Fusion, that I saw Samus as more of not really a conduit for me to play a game through, but more as a character. Because in Zero Mission, you lose your armor and you have to sneak around with the Zero suit. And at that point, I was like, well, Samus can still hold her own even when she doesn't have the weaponry to deal with like the Space Pirates, which is the section of the game where you're sneaking through, or where in Fusion she gets infected by the X parasite, and now she has this like dysmorphic suit, and she's kind of like on the brink of death the entire time, but she's still able to fight while running away from the SAX parasite. And it always brought to me this thing that like, yes, I'm playing as Samus, but Samus herself has these capabilities that are strong, such as being able to outwit an opponent without her armor, or being able to try to, be very evasive while running away in the Fusion games. Which is what Dread built upon, and why a lot of people like Dread with the Emmys. It shows that Samus is capable of fighting, but also capable of outwitting her opponents and maneuvering her way through dangerous situations, which I think is more of a thing that I would attribute to her as a character that I am controlling, and less to me controlling Samus and building that characteristic into her. Kind of like you mentioned, that Master Chief is like the perfect conduit for you to live out your super soldier fantasies in. So it just in this little segment, I've kind of been convinced otherwise, I guess.
Yeah. So I do want to speak, like, that is a very good point, that if you want the character to be like capable and show that sometimes gameplay isn't the best way to do it, or like a modification to the gameplay formula. Halo does not modify its gameplay formula from like mission to mission,
Right.
for example. The only way it does that is with its like sandbox. So the weapons you are provided, the vehicles you're provided, the enemies you face. They're never going to take away Chief's shield. I guess you can, like, the skulls do that, but that's not diegetic. So it's not, relevant to the story. If you wanted that from Chief, though, it exists in the expanded content, like the novels, right? The novels came out around the same, like the first set of novels came out around the same time as the first game. So if you really wanted to, if you were super invested in that universe and lore, and like I am to an extent, I want to say it's the way Spartans, which is the super soldiers from Halo, the whole program, are presented in that narrative. It's like, it's almost things of myth, where details are never really consistent, but that only really adds to the legend. And if I'm going to give you a point of reference here, like Space Marines in Warhammer, right? Where they've had so many iterations and so many different people writing about them. But
sometimes
even if the stuff is like not consistent, it's still fucking cool.
And sometimes they're like depicted as like super insane, and sometimes they're depicted as just as fragile against all the other forces that they're faced against. So it's interesting that like Master Chief is kind of more of a way to see yourself in a character that you build up to be this I guess monolith in the game series, as opposed to something more traditional, like say a developed character with a story plot, which I think is probably a good segue to, if you guys have another character that you think is a very good protag that is the opposite of Halo, which I was going to say maybe something like Final Fantasy, because I know you're a big fan of that, Mike.
2 characters
Okay.
in particular.
Yeah.
So I have been replaying through Final Fantasy X, a game that I also played when I was younger. I used to play on my like cousins' like PlayStation and Xbox, and one of the games that I first also played was Final Fantasy X. And replaying through it, I was kind of worried, like, oh man, is my,
Rose-tinted glasses.
yeah, like, is it all gonna like shatter? Is my perspective on Final Fantasy X gonna like, change in any way? If anything, I love the game more now as an adult,
Yeah.
Than I did as a kid. Because as a kid, I was like, yo, this is cool. Titus is fucking awesome. Like all these abilities, the summons, everything's cool. I was a dumbass when I played it as a kid, though.
Yeah.
Playing it now and fully understanding the sphere grid, and also fully understanding the combat. Man, the combat's genius. But the thing that really I love about that game is the story and the characters in it. And for me, the 2 standouts are Titus and Yuna. They are I would say the 2 main protagonists in the game, and
with charming laughs. Yeah, they have very good laughs.
Yeah. Funny cutscene. But despite some like, I guess dialogue being a little outdated, or I guess the way it's voice acted being a little outdated, the game really endears you to those 2, and the story they have to tell, and the world, and then their place in it. And I'm gonna try to keep this as spoiler free as possible, or maybe I shouldn't, because it's a fucking 23-year-old game.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna get into why Titus is such a relevant character for you, then I think it's worth discussing what makes him so strong.
I don't know if you guys ever have any intentions of playing the game, but I will spoil the shit out of it.
Okay. I don't really feel like.
All right, so spoiler alert for people who want to play Final Fantasy X, but I haven't for some reason in the past 23 years.
Blitzball is good, right?
Grow up. No, I'm just kidding. Blitzball and concept is cool. The gameplay, I'm not a fan of. Anyways, speaking about spoilers in general, we are probably going to spoil all of the games we speak about today when speaking about their respective protagonists. So consider this your, I guess, last spoiler warning. I mean, most of these games are, a couple years old, so hopefully not too bad for most of you guys. But yep, last spoiler warning. Now, why do I like Titus? Well, in general, he's a very lovable, charismatic jock. He starts off as a big blitzball celebrity in his home, Xanarkand, and is thrown into the world of Spira after this giant Leviathan named Sin attacks. He kind of acts like an audience surrogate in a way, experiencing this world for the first time as he is, and we get to like kind of experience that through his eyes. The way he reacts to things and speaks about things, everybody there sees him as clueless, or, as some say, he's clearly affected by Sin's toxins. And regardless of all of this that's being thrown at him, he still has this cheerful and upbeat persona to him that never really fades away, even with what happens throughout the story. Because as we go through the story of Final Fantasy X, we come to realize what Titus really is, which is a dream that's more akin to an Aeon than a human. The faith is like a very big thing, and in general, religion is a very big theme in the game. But the faith in particular are self-sacrifice spirits of humans who have sealed themselves to certain relics. They have 2 key abilities, the ability to dream and the mental link with the living summoners. Through this link, summoners can summon the dreams of the faith, and this is like the secret that, allows summoners to summon their Aeons in a way. So as the party ventures and discovers all of these secrets, they eventually come to the realization that Titus will no longer exist due to being a quote-unquote summoned by Yu Yevon, the true bad guy in the game. And what, in a show of true character. It shows who he really is, because he ends up saving the woman he loves and Spira, a basically brand new world that he was just thrown into, and choosing to let them live and go on over himself, who, by the way, he's a 17-year-old at this point in the game. So it really shows, who he really is, and just the, I guess, doing the right thing and the honor, because he could just continue this kind of like cycle of or spiral of death that Yu Yevon has brought into that world. But coming to understand that world and coming to love Yuna and how their relationship plays through that story really like endears me to him, and the growth that he that is depicted in the game throughout that story. It's like honestly something that you don't really see in too many video games, and it really is very heartfelt, and the themes and all the shit that goes through, because I mean, we didn't even talk about Sin, the main, I guess, pivotal like force in the game. He comes to the realization, or he's told through Auron, that that's his father, and like it's shown that he never had a great relationship with his father previously, and then like coming to understand that your father, which is revealed to love him very much and everything throughout the story, is kind of like wrecking shit throughout Spira. It's like a lot of stuff to handle.
Yeah.
And he just kind of is always like happy, and not happy, but like cheerful throughout, and like kind of like brings the party forward in a way, and is like a big driving and motivating factor in the party continuing to do what they do and to end up saving the world, with him being the heart of it. That I think that's what really speaks of it. Speaks of him. He is the heart of the game. He is the heart of the story. He is the heart of the party. And even though he does have his flaws, he's unabashedly himself. And sometimes there are times where he like says things, and you're like, bro, can you just shut up? Like, and not in a bad way, but just like in a way that it's like that's not the right time to say it. But it's like he's just so unabashedly himself throughout the whole game that you just can't help but like love him and who he is and the way he was written. And I mean, those are like the main things I really, really love about Titus.
It sounds a lot like I don't have much experience with Final Fantasy, unfortunately, because growing up I always wanted to get into it. I saw like the little black mages in the game, and I was like, that's cool. But coming from a religious household, my parents were always like, oh, it's black magic, no. And then I never got to play Final Fantasy because of that. But as somebody who got into the franchise a lot later and has a disgusting addiction of Final Fantasy 14, he kind of sounds like Alphino in the sense like a leader who kind of has a history before that, especially if you've played the alpha version before the world literally blew up, where he's a spiritual leader that also has a lot of downsides to him. I know a lot of people don't pay attention to the story of 14, but Alphino is kind of this guy who is thrust into a position of leadership and then finds out all the bad things in the world as he is learning to become the leader of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. So I guess that's probably the best relation I can bring Titus to, at least in the way that you explain him. Alex, have you had any experience with Final Fantasy games in the past?
I cannot say that I have. I have had people urging me to play 14 so much.
14 is a fucking amazing game. I've been playing it for too
game.
much.
Amazing.
The same people who are like, oh, you should play Yakuza and Monster Hunter. Like, you should play 14 as well. I'm like, look, I want to do shit with my friends, right? But at the same time, I don't like MMOs that much. Yeah. So, no, I know it's a franchise with a lot of history and a very complex history too, and I respect that. I think I'm at a point where I'm like,
it's too much, isn't it?
The time.
It kind of feels like
it can
be. I will say, like to that point, each game is like their own
thing,
separate.
Yeah, that is my understanding. If there was one I was going to play, I think it would be 7, because I understand that's probably like the most iconic game in the series.
It is. It is. It's a lot of people's favorite. I think it's the people who aren't into Final Fantasy that's like their favorite game. That's
Mhm.
like the one Final Fantasy
Yeah,
that
it's
they really
it
like.
seems like a lot of people who have played 7 have only played 7.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's a good game, don't get me wrong, but people who usually like are Final Fantasy heads, I at least in my experience talking to other people and reading stuff, tend to like 6, 9, and 10 more
Mhm.
um than 7.
6 sounds really cool. That's the one with Kefka, right?
6 is really cool. Yeah, I mean, you can't honestly you can't go wrong picking any of the games between 6 and 10. That's like considered like the golden era of, Final Fantasy,
Mm.
which I agree with.
It's
I think
interesting.
those are 8 is kind of like you'll have a lot of varied opinions on 8. A lot of people have strong opinions on it whether they hate or love it, mostly because the junction system and some people don't like Squall.
Yeah.
It's a very divisive game. But that whole era is considered like the best of Final Fantasy. So if you were to start anywhere, I would recommend 10 because that's my favorite, and I think it's the more modernized out of all the games.
Yeah.
Unless you
Uh-huh.
play the remakes of 7. But then they kind of fuck around with the story in the remakes that a lot of people don't like. So I would suggest 10, but yeah, any of those games are honestly great.
Was it 12 that
Okay.
12 is the Zodiac Age one, right? That's the one that takes place in
Yes.
Ivories.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know a lot of people. I'm one of the few. I don't know about few actually. It's a pretty big portion of people who the introduction to Final Fantasy and probably one of their favorite games is the people who played the spin-off Final Fantasy Tactics, which does take place in Ivory. So my understanding is that it takes place in the same world as 12, right? Um so I played Tactics when I was a kid. That was my first introduction into it. Tactics Advance, sorry. I never got to play the OG Tactics, but that's the thing that like cemented me into like, yes, I'm a Final Fantasy fan now, especially as somebody who really likes turn-based RPGs. So that it's kind of crazy how it seems like Final Fantasy is one of those games that people come from all walks of either spin-offs or mainline series. But it just seems like 7 takes the attention the most, and then I'd like to think that 14 is kind of like, I don't want to say hidden gem, but it's hidden in the sense that people like Alex are kind of put off by the fact that it's an MMO, but it traditionally feels a lot like a Final Fantasy game in the sense of like the story is the main
Yeah,
arc
for
that's
sure.
carrying you through that. But with that, seeing that Titus is more solidified in like the story, do you have somebody like that, Alex, as an anime protag? God damn it, yeah, as a game protag that you think is kind of on the level of Titus more than Master Chief?
So I think if they're solidified in the narrative, but still uses the tool to introduce you, I think that describes from Witcher 1, Geralt of Rivia to like Witcher
Specifically
Bridgeforth,
one.
right? Yeah, well, do you know the
I
context
don't.
behind,
That's why I'm asking.
like so let's actually dive into that. So The Witcher started as a series of Polish novels back, I want to say, as early as the 90s. They were like short stories, and then they became a novel series. They're very beloved over there. They're like a big cultural kind of staple of like Polish fantasy and all that. So, in order to introduce you to the world, right, and to kind of pick off where the novels ended, and this is as someone who's maybe read 2 or 3 of them over a series of there's a couple. It's like 5 or 6 books, maybe more. Geralt starts the first game with amnesia, and moreover, he has been missing for some time from the world.
Okay.
Right. He is recovered by some familiar faces from the books, like their fellow Witchers and a sorceress that he's has like a relationship with. That like sometimes word is romantic, but it's a little more complicated than that. But so it's a way to introduce you to some of the characters of the world, right? And then as Geralt is learning, so are you.
Okay, so like Titus.
So
in a
obviously,
way.
yeah, right. So Geralt is a very independent character. He's not really meant to be like this leader sort of character. You're not traveling with a party in The Witcher. You're adventuring alone for the most part of the games. On occasional quests, especially in 3, you'll travel along with one of your friends, or you'll have like a party or conversation with them. But you're a professional monster slayer, and as such, you kind of go around interacting with the world, and then there's this overarching narrative that's supposed to drive Geralt forward. Now, I think Geralt is interesting because 1 and 2 both go off of the basis of him having amnesia. By 2, he has had a lot of his memories, or like a lot of his life dictated to him. so he kind of knows what he should be looking out for, but is still like his own person from the start of the first game.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is like the people he meets in Witcher 1 and 2 are his friends, but if he encounters someone from before that time that was maybe in the novels, he'd be like, yeah, sorry, I don't fucking remember you. I lost my memory. Just remind me what happened. And that's still like, it's an easy tool for the narrative to use, and it's effective, and I don't think it's like lazy or anything. In fact, I think it's like pretty clever to have the protagonist, like an established protagonist, learn about the world at the same time as the players while telling a new story. So in The Witcher 3, he gets his memories back, and that is kind of the sequel to the novels in a sense, that you are now learning about these more important characters, that being his main love interest, Yennefer, and his adoptive daughter, Ciri, who over the course of the last 2 games you're hearing all about, but you never really see. So it's just so Geralt isn't really someone you can customize too much, right? Outside of some basic cosmetics. And like his fighting style is the same. He uses 2 swords. One of them is meant to fight like people, steel for humans, silver for monsters, right? He's a monster, again, slayer. So he's got his set of skills that he uses, his equipment that he uses, and that is set game after game after game. You take potions to enhance your abilities. You use very specific set of magic to influence combat and kind of have those outcomes. And they're all meant to be tools at the Witcher's disposal, right? You're not going to be using a bow. You're not going to be, I mean, kind of, but it's never meant to be replacing your main tool set of the 2 swords. Right. So he is someone that his story is set. His personality is pretty set too, right? Like you can play him a little more like neutral or sometimes even like cruel. Yeah. Or you can play him as a much more like heroic character, but he's never meant to be like this RPG protagonist that's always going to step up and save the day. And while he gets involved in a lot of world-changing events, he's never the instigator. I think that's really important for Geralt. He, for the most part, if he fights for something, he's fighting for his like friends or his family. Yeah, right. So, it does include you in the politics, but it's more so because Geralt was already involved with these people before, and they have moved up in the world, and they know Geralt is a reliable character, so he's not exactly setting the policy. Naturally, your gameplay choices do influence like what happens, but it's narratively it's presented in like an offhand way.
I will say he's a badass. I love
Geralt. He is, yeah. Does it ever change the outcome of the game based on how you choose to carry Geralt through the game? Like the way you choose to act?
Kind of. So there are Witcher 2 is great for this because it actually has
like
after the end of the first act. Yeah, at the end of the first act, you choose to go with one of 2 characters, and Act 2 and 3 are almost completely different because of it. So it's a great chance to like replay the game and experience something new. So it's you go with one character, and then Act 2 is you're on this side of the conflict.
I gotcha.
And then and then reverse, of course. So it's interesting that way. Witcher 3 has a more like straightforward narrative, right? And it has multiple endings based off of key choices you made during the narrative, but they mostly pertain to your adoptive daughter Ciri and like her fate and Geralt's fate after that. So it's meant to be like a wrap up of Geralt's adventures overall, as opposed to set up for another game or anything like that. Gotcha. Right? I think there is probably going to be like a canon timeline, because Witcher 4 is coming out and Ciri's in it, and she's a Witcher, and that is one of the endings of The Witcher 3. Spoiler alert! But it looks like they've already told you that. So it's interesting. So yeah, you can play Geralt as someone who's willing to step in and be heroic, but he himself even says, I don't really like doing that too much. Right. He tries to be a neutral party as much as possible. He's like, oh, Witchers don't have emotions. He's full of shit when he says that. It's kind of a point in the narrative where he's just kind of deflecting. Yeah. But overall, it's not like a traditional, like, again, open world or Bethesda RPG where you can be a completely evil, psychopathic character.
Like a murder hobo.
No. Yeah, you can't be a murder hobo. You can't be this, like, major thief. Although in Witcher 3, you kind of can be, because you can just walk into people's homes and steal all their shit and they don't really say anything. But that's not really like a point of that's called upon in the narrative beyond like some basic, very, very, very basic crime and punishment system. So ultimately, Geralt is a guy who will do the side quests, will do the monster hunting job, will complete the main story, because that is Geralt's goals. And deviation from those goals it's enough to keep it interesting, but it's never anything that's going to change the fate of the world.
So he feels more like a character living in the world, as opposed to somebody who's like taking on world-ending threats. He feels a lot more grounded in that sense.
For sure.
Yeah, which ironically he does take on world-ending threats, but
okay.
Those things would probably have happened without him.
Yeah. So I've got a question. Because I love Witcher 1 and 2, couldn't get into 3, which is crazy for most people.
I do remember that,
the favorite. Why do you like Geralt more than somebody, let's say, like Ciri, who is a pretty well-established character? Is it more because you play as Geralt more and he has more of a backstory than we've seen from Ciri so far, or is it because of his demeanor and like his personality, or what?
Well, I don't think you can take away from the fact that you've been playing for him for 2-3 games now, right? Ciri, I still like, and she's not what I consider the protagonist, though. Mm-hmm. She's not, at the time of playing, The Witcher.
Yeah.
Right? She's Geralt's daughter. She's a part of the narrative. You do play as her. You are correct in that regard. But she was never the main character of that story. She was someone who drives Geralt forward. She's a bit of a MacGuffin. Still a great character in her own right. But Geralt is the one that you are experiencing the world through. And he's, if you want to know why I like him per se over other characters, I think he's funny, right? I think he does have the capacity to be very endearing, even though he pretends he's not, and like very caring character. You can call it like positive masculinity or something, but I don't even think it's that deep.
In a way, he kind of circles back, like having this stalwart and kind of nonchalant attitude is what circles back full to make him a likable character in a way.
Yeah. And even if
also like calls out like bullshit when he sees it, which I fucking love.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the depth of narrative you're going to get from Geralt, he's got like 2 or 3 dialogue options at most in most situations. Yeah. And most of them are either, I'm not getting involved in this, or, okay, I guess I'll get involved in this, or let's play Gwent. Again, if you're looking for a deep RPG where you can make a lot of choices, not really the thing. You're following a script here. You more so, it's like choose your own adventure in that regard. Kind of like Mass Effect, and I want to talk about Mass Effect too. But Geralt's story is written. You can twist and turn it how you like, and how you play the game does affect that in small ways. But ultimately, you are experiencing Geralt of Rivia's story, and I think it's a damn good story, and Geralt's a damn good protagonist. As a final note, because he presents himself as someone who isn't that deep, but if you actually pay attention to what he's saying and what he's doing, has a lot to him.
Yeah, he's like Shrek. He has layers.
yeah, exactly.
So, I think hearing both like the perspective on Titus and the perspective on Geralt, kind of opened up, I guess, my interpretation on a couple characters that I probably wouldn't say are my favorite, but I would say are very, very solid for the game space. So I'll go into one the next time I circle around, but for now, leaning on the idea how you were saying that Titus is kind of like, I don't want to say tragic, but you can understand his decisions in something that is seen as kind of like go lucky, but not really. One game that I was crazy for, and not so crazy for the sequel, was The Last of Us, and specifically I'm going to get into Joel here because I really like him as a character, even though a lot of people tended to be 50-50 on him. And I think that a big reason for that comes in the end of the game, and that was a controversial pick, but the fact that he was killed off immediately in Last of Us 2 kind of speaks for how people felt about him, because a lot of people that didn't like Joel ended up very disappointed with the fact that he died in the beginning of the second game, right? But I think the one thing that I really like about Joel as a character is kind of like Geralt. He kind of starts as kind of this nonchalant, I don't really want to do things that I don't want to do guy. and throughout the game you see him as kind of like not wanting to deal with the nonsense of escorting Ellie. By the end of the game, he is very much somebody who cares for more than just completing this mission, or trying to carry out this mission for Tess after she was killed, but rather because he actually has affection for something that he thought he would never care about at the beginning of the game. It's very much like a transformation story in his regard. And the ending of the game is probably the most controversial, because if you guys, I'm sure both of you have played Last of Us, right?
I have.
I have
Okay.
not, actually.
So he's basically escorting this girl who has the cure to this plague that has been,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah, let me. I just say I do have a lot of the knowledge behind the story of The Last of Us. I don't know like every plot beat. I haven't watched the playthrough or anything, but I know that Ellie's got like the cure in her blood, pretty much. She's immune to the plague, and that in The Last of Us 2, Joel is killed near the beginning, and she kind of has to take it on. And then there's like this whole thing with the other you play as a chick who killed them at certain points, and that kind of pissed people off.
Yeah, I think the thing that really makes Joel, right? Because throughout the game, you kind of start relating with him more and more, because you like want to see this through, right? And you want to see Joel succeed, even though he started kind of as like a pretentious asshole in the beginning of the game. But I think the beat that really takes me to that extra step to making him one of my favorite characters in gaming is the fact that at the end of the game, when Ellie is kind of ready to know that, well, I don't remember off the top of my head if she knows that she's going to die from the operation or not, to take the cure off of her and be able to distribute it to the rest of humanity. But Joel basically goes in and kills the doctors that are performing the operation on her, to try to have her back, because he kind of sees her as like a surrogate daughter in a way. And I know a lot of people were kind of like, well, that's very selfish of him, because he doesn't even tell Ellie about the fact that he did that, and that despite being able to influence the rest of the world and get them out of this hellscape, that he took Ellie, the cure of this, disease, and kept them to herself as like a daughter, because that's what he was missing after he lost his daughter in the beginning of the game. And the idea that when I finished that game and put it down, that while I didn't agree with Joel's choice, I understood it, right? Like Joel at that point became, I think, the most relatable character, because I don't know if I was in that situation if I would be as confident to say, well, yeah, no, it's like the cure of humanity, man. Of course I would let Ellie, continue the operation. I don't think I would. And I think a lot of people were divided on that. And that speaks to a testament as to why Joel's character development and him as a very grounded person in this world that is brutal in every single way is very, very well fleshed out. You know what I mean?
It's funny you mentioned the ending. I think for me, I think the part that like endears me to Joel and what he goes through in the story and how he grows and how he is at the beginning is because the very beginning of the game.
Knowing who
you see what happens. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Knowing what happens pre I guess apocalypse. And how he was and how that turned him, and why he acts the way he does in the beginning, but then kind of seeing what Ellie, like his relationship with Ellie does to him, and how it kind of changes, and how the ending, you just it feels natural, where you're just where you see what's happening there, and the way he reacts with what he did, it's almost like second nature, like he didn't have to think about it. I think that's what really, for me at least, endeared me to him, was like seeing that pre-apocalypse like segment and everything.
It really drills the point home as to why he made that decision. But I guess the thing that really influences me with Joel is like, if I was put in that decision, what would I do, knowing that I can save the rest of humanity for the life of one person, but that one person is reliving the, like, I guess the trauma that he went through by losing his own daughter, right? That's the thing that really, I think, fleshed him out. Because even throughout the game, when you play as Ellie when Joel was injured, I didn't think like, oh, I have to do this. Like, I was genuinely thinking, I want to save Joel. You know what I mean? Like, it got to a point where I was like, I need to make sure that I can see this through to continue to see how Joel reacts to the rest of the game. And I think that that's just like a very relatable character in the way that they fleshed him out. And it's part of the reason why I actually kind of didn't want to play 2 when I found out that Joel died. Like, I understand moving a game forward and all, but Joel was just that much of a relatable character to me. So I think that's probably why I would put him up in my list. But
definitely very strong pick.
Yeah,
really like that. I do want to bring forward a protagonist I've come to love in the last year. And that's going to be James Sunderland from Silent Hill 2.
Yeah, you're late to this train.
Yeah, I first played Silent Hill 2 in October because I saw the remake was coming out. The first trailers did not look great, but then they kept releasing more stuff, and I'm like, it looks cool. And I think the reviews came out like a week or two earlier.
Well, the reviews were out for about 20 years, just to be clear.
Well, for the remake. Yeah, so I was like, this might be a good point for me to like dive into Silent Hill. Right?
I mean, Silent Hill,
it was always a franchise that I've like kind of like wanted to dive into, or like
it's like Resident Evil 2 in a way.
Fucked with from afar. Yeah, but like I've always liked Resident Evil.
I know, but I'm saying that
Silent Hill was kind of like the scarier version of Resident Evil.
Yeah, this was an entry point for a lot of people that missed the train, so to speak.
Exactly. So I decided before playing the remake to play the original.
Did you really?
Yes.
Like the OG?
I completed the OG.
Oh, wow.
I played it on an emulator. Because the fucking original copy is way too fucking expensive.
I just didn't know.
It's like $100-something. It's ridiculous.
I think I still have.
Played...
Oh my God.
I think I still have an OG copy of Resident Evil 2 for the 64 somewhere. I'm sure it's worth quite a bit.
Definitely hold on to that.
I think it might have been thrown away.
This guy. But playing the OG. Or I guess I'll talk about James in general.
Yeah.
Man, that story and
it breaks
the
you.
way, like, how complicated James is as a character, the things they do with exploring kind of like the depths of like negative emotions or negative things about a person. And although you can't relate to what he does or how he's acted or things he's done and stuff, there's like the breakdown of those emotions and the breakdown of what turns a person like that and the breakdown of why he does the things he does and why he is the way he is.
So real quick, I have also not played Silent Hill.
I was just about to ask. Yeah, so I was going to ask you, and I guess for the general audience who don't know, in Silent Hill, the way that the game is depicted is this like strange town, so to speak, brings forth the deepest thoughts and regrets X, Y, and Z of the character that you're playing as by manifesting them, right? So in the Silent Hill that I can remember the most, I played quite a bit, Homecoming, Downpour. I think I've played a little bit of the OG for 2, but I haven't played the remake. But to bring it back, in Downpour, you play as like a convict who murdered a person. I think it was, if I remember correctly, somebody who sexually assaulted their child. And a lot of the things, he was like a convict, he ran away from the police a lot, and in that game, the enemies are manifested by, say, the sirens of a police car, right? Or like the sexual assault is depicted by like these mannequins with red stains around like their genitals and stuff like that. So a lot of the horrors that are brought forth in the game are very subconscious thoughts of the protagonist you're currently playing at. It kind of manifests the horrors of the people that are there. So maybe you can get a little bit more into that with how James relates to you.
I will say that is highly dependent on which game.
Oh, really?
Yes, because Silent Hill 1 and 3 have more of a like general story. There are certain things about, I think, 3 that kind of could relate to Heather. But Silent Hill 1 and 3 are kind of like their own thing. So it's kind of been not a toss-up, but it changes from game to game on whether or not the location of Silent Hill is something that's more, I guess, representative of somebody like James. And good thing you point that out, because, I mean, in Silent Hill 2, man, fucking Silent Hill is a hellhole, and the monsters that indicative of James's emotions and James's like guilt and James's thoughts, feelings, and stuff like that. Over time, they kind of come to fruition as you like go through the story, and it's everything's well crafted, very well thought out, and it all speaks to who James is as a character. Which it's like they make you hate him but not hate him, which is really fucking hard to do.
Right, like
where you're just
sympathize
like,
almost.
you did a really fucking shitty thing, but then it's just like, man, like, you know, like it makes you think. It's one of those things that I think something like a video game or just media in general with a well-written character is the world is not black and white, it's gray.
Yeah.
And he is very much that, you know, he epitomizes that.
Mm-hmm.
He is a very gray character where, you know, there are things about him that you just hate and you don't get, and there's things about him where, you know, you're just like, I kind of understand, or at least like you're like, I personally wouldn't have done that, but I kind of can understand maybe the thought process behind it in some way. It's very, like, once you start like diving deep into that, it is very rewarding, and I think that's why people love Silent Hill 2 so much. Is
Hey, Mike, this is going to be an aside from our. Have you played a game called Mouthwashing?
Yes. I was gonna introduce him to it, and then he told me he played it, and I was like, I didn't think he would like this game, but he ended up loving it.
No, Mouthwashing's fucking amazing. Yeah.
So I haven't played it. I've only heard like good things about it from a friend, but I just reading a little bit about
very
the plot,
reminiscent
like,
of Silent Hill, I think.
Yeah,
less in the horror and more in the narrative. But if I can just kind of really quickly explain, maybe you can correct me here, Mike, because it's been a while since I played Silent Hill 2. But the reason that James is such a controversial character is because, if I remember correctly, his wife was bedridden, and he basically was like sexually frustrated, so he started cheating on her, and then eventually ended up killing her because she was too much of a nuisance basically to take care of. Am I right in that?
Yes, but then at the same time, she was a real fucking piece of shit. That's what I'm saying is like, okay, I wouldn't have killed her.
Yeah.
but I could see, as a guy who's been with, you know, his wife for 2 years, how you can become frustrated. I think the disease was lasting for 2 years or so.
Yeah, it's a very long time.
He becomes frustrated over time because A, she acts like a total piece of shit, and B, it's just kind of like whenever he's with her, it's kind of like this just soul sucking thing, right? Where it's just like all the energy is like sapped from him, right? And so his mind begins to wander, and like he's with this woman who's at her end, who is all over the place with her emotions, which rightfully so. She's got a life-threatening disease. It's like kind of the actions that he takes and everything, you can see what kind of drives him there,
right?
And he understands that he is somewhat guilty for that and everything, and that's why Silent Hill 2 is the way it is. It's a way of like self-punishment, sort of like atonement,
right?
And there's a pivotal moment even in the game where he's like, I get it now, like, you know, he's literally the Danny DeVito meme too, where he's like, I get it now, like all of this had to happen for me to understand and everything.
Yeah, and the reason I bring up like the past is because, just to enunciate to Alex and the rest of the audience, is a lot of his decisions were poor, and he was in a circumstance basically where you can understand why he took those actions even though you wouldn't have taken them, and it makes this character be I guess defined in a world where he made bad choices, and Silent Hill in a way is punishing him for those choices by making him face the music. And because of that, you almost feel sympathetic for everything you're going through, while at the same time figuring out what he did and things that would make you traditionally hate a character like him. But the more you get into it, the more you feel sympathetic for somebody who was rather disgusting, and then you kind of come in conflict with like, well, I'm playing as James. I see what James is going through, all this guilt, all this pain, all this tragedy, even though he has made some of the worst decisions in his life. And now it's being realized by coming to Silent Hill, and both you and him are coming to these terms where it's like, I understand my punishment, I understand why I'm here, but this is a nightmare that I wouldn't even want anyone to go through if they committed something like this. And I think that's what makes James such a fleshed out character, to be to be sympathetic towards somebody in the worst circumstances that either he finds himself in due to his own actions, and then due to ending up in Silent Hill as a character himself. I think that's really what makes him in a way stand apart from a character like in Mouthwashing, where he is an ass through and through. You just figure it out the more you get into the story as you play as this character, whereas for one character in Silent Hill I felt sympathetic, and the other I felt absolute hatred towards, you know?
So I gotta ask, do you think it's more sympathy or do you think it's more pity?
In a way,
I think it's sympathy.
I think it's sympathy too.
Okay.
Because you watch him come to terms with it. Like you see that he understands it, and it's not like pity in the sense of like I'm sad that this guy is going through this experience. It's more like I'm sympathetic in the sense that he's suffering through this and still kind of like trudging along because he understands what he did wrong. He's not in denial about it. By the end of the game, he understands everything, right? And am I right that he doesn't really remember how things went in the beginning of the game, and only the farther he gets, the more he remembers, right?
Dude, he like kind of gives himself like amnesia.
Yeah,
from, like unironically, like he like represses everything.
Because the entire point that started the game was the fact that he got a letter, right? That his wife was in Silent Hill and wanted for him to come grab her. So in a way, even though that James is the person who killed his wife, in the whole premise of the game of him going to Silent Hill is him trying to get his wife back. Like that's what makes it so sympathetic.
I mean, it's like revealed that the letter he's holding is empty.
Right.
Like there's no words on it and everything. And I mean, it says like throughout the game he's like, "Oh, my wife died like 3 months or I think it's 3 months or is it 3 years ago, something like that." And it's like heavily hinted at once you like, read certain things that she like died a week ago.
Yeah. And like a lot of the
like,
one of the characters that he
something
finds
like
in
that.
Silent Hill is very resemblant of his wife. Like that thought of what he did is in the back of his mind so much that it is manifested through the actions of Silent Hill, even though that he is also at the same time repressing the fact that he did that by not remembering that his wife is even dead when you start the game. That's what I think what makes it so sympathetic is that you know that he cares about his wife despite what he did.
I'm gonna recommend a game to you both if you haven't already played it called Spec Ops: The Line.
Oh, come on!
I haven't played it yet, but I have it.
I know exactly about Spec Ops. It's very good.
I know it's kind of a meme at this point. It's like
it's a moral fight the entire time.
Yeah.
No
So like,
I want to play through it.
Yeah.
Oh, really? You don't even know any? You don't even know the
it.
story?
No.
Mike, you know, here's what you gotta do. You gotta play through Call of Duty Modern Warfare 1, 2, and 3, and then go play Spec Ops.
You'll understand
Okay.
why at the time it was considered like a lot of people just saw it as like a another action shooter like what Alex said, Modern Warfare. But then you continue to play it and you realize that it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's also an RTS. I may be lying. You'll never know until you play it.
But what about you, Alex? What's your next character up in line?
So if we're gonna pivot from horror, I want to talk a little bit. And this is not super horror, but I think it's characters we all think are super badass. The Belmonts from the Castlevania series.
Yeah, when you press B and shoot the whip forward, I remember that. Are you a big Castlevania fan?
I'm a huge.
Oh,
Castlevania
really?
fan.
What game would you rate?
Really big,
as, like the top one.
So I think if you're going to play Castlevania for the first time, right, you never played it before, you should play Symphony
Most
of the Night,
people
which ironically you don't play as a Belmont. It is the definitive like Metroidvania. I think it's what added Vania to that, right? Whereas the previous games are more like platformy action games. So even with the Belmonts, you're not getting a whole lot of story, but it's a legacy, right? That carries on from game to game, and just the discussions you can have around like who's the coolest Belmont.
Trevor,
right? Like Simon Belmont's the most iconic.
Trevor's my favorite.
Yeah, because you guys watched the anime. Right?
Yeah.
Well, to be fair,
tell me, who here played Castlevania 3? All right,
to be fair,
right.
I grew up playing a lot of Castlevania. Again, Castlevania was one of those games that my parents didn't let me play because they thought it was like demonic and whatever. So I had to borrow the first Castlevania game that I played, Circle of the Moon, which is still my favorite Castlevania game.
Great
yeah,
game.
no, it's fantastic. Ironically, you do not play as a Belmont, but I think you play as like, I think your teacher is like a descendant of a person that was mentored by a Belmont, but it has nothing to do with the Belmonts.
Yeah, it's like 3 degrees of separation.
Yeah,
I think you play as a Morris in that game or something.
It was like Nathan. I think you play as
Nathan. I think you're right. I have the advanced.
Yeah. It's a good ass game.
Look at it, yeah, so it's really funny. I think the best Castlevania games are the games you don't play as Belmont.
So then why do you like the Belmont so much?
How do you experience it? So I like the Belmont so much because they know what they're doing, and that's a theme in horror, and I think we can talk a little bit more. Like I have Isaac Clarke on this list too because he's just a super smart character that like he's not necessarily a fucking necromorph or alien slayer, right? But he's an engineer, survivor. So he knows he's a survivor. He's an engineer, so he's still smart, and that's what I like about like horror protagonists is when they are actually intelligent people. But just to talk about the Belmonts, the fact that they're so well like equipped to do what they do, right? They're trained to do what they do. The anime especially like highlights this in how Trevor, even though he only got like half the training most Belmonts do, is immediately steps into gear when shit goes down with like these night creatures and vampires. He knows exactly how to like. He's like, get the holy water,
salt and the pitchforks.
Salt and the pitchforks and everything. And it's like, there's competence here because this is their forte. They know what they're doing. And then, you can get in the games like Harmony of Despair where you get the deep lore, like when the Belmont started. And again, it really depends on which games you played. That's going to outline which Belmont is the best one for you. For example, I really like the Symphony of Night Rondo of Blood era. So Richter Belmont is naturally my favorite Belmont. And you can argue there is like a subtle difference between each of them in that like you can find which one's your favorite. Like Richter Belmont, for example, I really like because he's a very physical Belmont, right? Even though, you have the whip and you have the sub weapons. He also like rushes down people. He does uppercuts and like dive kick shit. So it's very cool. But then you have like characters like Juiced Belmont, who is Richter's grandfather. And they're meant to be played with like magic more in mind, and the gameplay's built around that. And then there's just Julian Belmont, who you don't really play as, but he's just really fucking cool because he's the one who finally defeats Dracula. So you're not really going on huge narrative journeys with these. If you want that, you can watch the animes. I think they serve very well to do that. But the fact that you are playing as a character that from the get-go is competent and has the tools to do their job well, and then each game introduces you to a new one who is really well designed, like in terms of visuals, right? I think Castlevania's like art style is, especially again starting from that Symphony of the Night era, is like iconic at this point, right? It's gorgeous artwork. And I mean, if you guys want to add to it, I know you guys also enjoy Castlevania.
As somebody who loves Metroid,
so I just don't like.
Besides Simon's tasteful thighs that are very exposed and very relevant. No, I don't have much experience in Castlevania, surprisingly. Mainly because I was kind of barred from it from my childhood. But I got my fix through Metroid, but not really related to gaming, but it is based after gaming franchise. Like going into the Belmont legacy, even Trevor, when he grew up and you go to the Belmont hold, it shows that they have years and years of experience dealing with like the creatures of the night, so to speak. And he's even gloatful about it, despite being a Belmont that just kind of is like the last of his line and hasn't really been there in years, right? It just kind of attests to the point that you were saying, how the Belmonts are more of a, I guess, an idea. They're not exactly fleshed out, but when you hear the Belmont, like when you saw Trevor take off his coat,
it's got weight behind it.
Yeah, when you saw Trevor take off his coat and say, "I am the Belmont," or Trevor Belmont, last of the Belmonts, and you see that crest in his back, you're just like, "Oh, I get it now." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you understand why the Belmonts are treated in the way that they are, even though in the anime at least they're treated as kind of like hated in a way. There is still weight behind their name, and I think that really does a good point.
Yeah, I think that's a point of like human ingenuity might be the word there, but I think it goes more beyond like the fighting spirit of humanity against the dark. Like literally in this case, Dracula being Lord of the Night and all that. We're like, yes, you are faced against these innumerable otherworldly horrors that are more powerful than you, and all you have is a bit of leather coiled up together and some knives, and you still win.
Yeah.
Right? Because you are the hero here. You're just a human who is well prepared for their task, and so you dive into it, and they succeed, and like time after time after time they succeed. So you gotta ask Drac, like, why do you keep trying, dude?
I personally haven't played a Castlevania, but I have watched like at least the first show, because I know there's the new one, Nocturne, right? But at least somebody who's like kind of somewhat paid attention to some things, even though I haven't played it. I do know who Simon and Richter are, right? Definitely very cool legacy, and the name Belmont means something, right? Even to somebody like me who hasn't played the games, and you just think those guys are cool. They have very cool like whips and chains. Fuck Dracula, right? So it's like
Yeah.
definitely speaks to that. One person I do want to bring forth that I really love, Sam Fisher from Splinter Cell.
Ooh.
Have you guys played Splinter Cell?
I've played
Or
Conviction
any-
with you, where you
I
do not play
played
as Sam Fisher.
one of them
At
a
least in the
long
co-op
time
campaign.
ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, in Conviction in the co-op campaign, you don't play as Sam. You play as Archer and man, I forgot
The Russian guy, and then you have to kill yourselves in the plane. Conviction is the one that one scene I'm sure you're gonna get into where Sam finds out the fate of his daughter, right? Is that game?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. He Conviction in general is kind of, I kind of want to say the black sheep of the
Is it
Splinter Cell
really?
franchise, because it's very different.
Okay.
Because all the other games are very focused on stealth, and they're more kind of grounded, whereas Conviction is a personal story first and foremost of Sam, and then very more like a lot more action oriented.
Yeah.
Like the fact that you can just fill up a bar and one tap however many people your gun allows is
Yeah.
like, crazy. The thing that really endears me to Sam and why I love him, his voice actor Michael Ironside is fucking amazing.
Oh yeah.
He really, really like makes the character feel like an actual like it feels like a person. It doesn't feel like a video game character that's written. It feels like somebody who's been through a lot of shit, and is like one of the main Splinter Cells. Another thing is the balance of his character in relation to his organization. I guess something to speak, like a moment to speak on that. In Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, North Korea invades South Korea and the states are drawn into war. I think they like blow up one of their ships or something. Lambert gives Fisher direct orders to order an airstrike on a destroyed jet that had data they were looking for. You then see there are 2 American pilots who seem to be unconscious but are still alive. Sam then tells Lambert he's going to move the pilots' bodies to safety, and Lambert tells him you don't have enough time to do that. They go back and forth, and once Fisher finishes moving the bodies, Lambert tells him something to the effect of, "You don't exist, Fisher. You won't get a medal for this." And Fisher retorts, "Medals don't help me sleep at night." I think that speaks a lot to his character, how even though he's a deadly Splinter Cell who has killed so many people and has done so many things under the NSA banner, he still has dignity, respect, and honor. And it just adds like overall kind of class, where it's like this moment that nobody will ever know what you did besides Lambert and yourself. You still decide to do, take the time to do what's right in this moment. He's also a sarcastic motherfucker, man. He gives so much sass, but it's so fucking funny, and it's kind of like dryish humor.
Yeah.
But it's like played very well, where it's not like, haha, this is funny, and like this is goofy or anything. It's like somebody like that, is a, chiseled old veteran would act or talk and everything, and it just lends more to the credibility of the character. He's also in the aspect of like, I guess I'm gonna relate him to the Belmonts here, where he knows what the fuck he's doing. By the time you're playing Splinter Cell 1, he's a 50-year-old guy who's been there, done that, knows everything, and is very well versed and very well trained in his field of expertise. So as you play, as you play as Sam Fisher throughout the game, or at least throughout the franchise, he really exemplifies that, and it just feels like kind of badass and awesome to feel or play as somebody like him. It's just like Master Chief in that aspect too, where it's not really a power fantasy, but like you do get the fantasy of playing as that spy.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
not to the extent of 007 like James Bond, but you do feel like the sense like you get that credibility of playing as a international spy that nobody knows about. And Sam Fisher, I think, is the best vessel for something like that.
Yeah.
Highly recommend that franchise if anybody out
I
there
think
has been
the one thing that kind
thinking
of
about
really
playing it.
pushed me into Fisher was seeing that scene that Nakey Jakey highlighted, where he realizes that what happened to, I think, his daughter, wasn't it? And
Mm-hmm.
you feel like that paternal rage, I guess, of like you sympathize with that moment where you find out something that is so like tragic and anger inducing that you kind of just lose all elements of what Fisher embodies, which is like stealth and wittiness, and then he just goes on a murderous spree outside of that building. I thought that was like really cool, for the
Yeah,
little that I have seen.
it's like that aspect of, like I said, like defiance of like orders and stuff in that aspect, because he just kind of just loses all
Yeah, flies off the handle.
coolness, calmness, and just fucking just wrecks shit.
Yeah,
And you get like infinite executions and
Right,
shit.
right.
It's just like a really cool like storytelling through gameplay, and
yeah.
everything.
I thought that was really cool too, because I tend to like those characters that like have that sympathetic aspect to them, where you're just like, I
Mhm.
understand. I mean, that's why I like Joel so much, is you understand exactly where they're coming from, and for you
Yeah.
to be in that position as Sam after all you've done to get to that point of the game, you're just like, yeah, it's time to do that. You know what I mean? It's time to throw all
Yeah.
morals.
He's kind of like the antithesis of Titus, actually. He's like the direct opposite of what Titus is. You
Yeah.
know, he knows everything. He's cool, calm, collected. You know, he like says he has like some funny like moments and stuff where he sarcastically says shit that just makes you smirk, and everybody still loves him, but in like a completely opposite direction
Yeah.
from somebody like Titus. You know,
And to see him kind of react in that way to break his character for something that is so, I guess, pivotal to the story of the game, it really just brings out the fact that he is that character. To see him do the complete opposite of what he's been categorized for, at that point, I think like multiple games, is kind of insane, right? To see him lose his cool
Yeah.
that way. Speaking of losing your cool, I don't know if this is counts, right? This is why I said that I'm probably not the best subject for this. I'm sure, I don't know if Alex knows, but Mike, that one of my favorite games, and one of the reasons that I had problems coming up with this list, is the Darkest Dungeon franchise, right? And
Oh,
have you
love
played
that.
them?
Yeah, I love the first one. I haven't gotten around.
So
the
maybe you
second
can
one.
understand a little bit of my aspect.
I've beaten the first one a while ago, and my fucking god.
Surprisingly, I've never beat Darkest Dungeon 1. I never got to the last level and made it all the way through. I mean, the world of Darkest Dungeon, you can attest to how fucking amazing it is.
Yeah.
So in
Oh.
2, what they decided to do is go for a more roguelike aspect, right? You're not really like building up your characters and trying to get them out of these situations. Because in 1, they're a lot more replaceable, right? Like you have your class,
Yeah.
and you have like the main character that embodies that class, but you don't have like any real connection to them, bar the fact that you've put so much work into progressing them forward, right? Like if your huntsman, or if your bulwark dies, what is his name? Like the jester,
The
man at arms, yeah. If I'm thinking of his abilities and not his actual name, but
Yeah.
if they would die, you just recruit another one, right? Like you're just sad the fact that you lost this progress. But in 2, the characters are actual characters, so their names escape me at the moment. But like every single class has like an origin story. That's the whole point of Darkest Dungeon 2. So the man at arms is still called the man at arms, but he has a story as to why he's there now, right? And the game kind of does this thing where the mountain, which is like the last area you get to, is the characters kind of dealing with their past. And the more you progress through the game, the more you get to see the past of the characters. So while it's not one character in particular, what I'm getting at here with them being my favorite protagonists, plural there, is the fact that when you start getting to that later point of the game, the whole mechanic of Darkest Dungeon is the stress system. So when they get stressed in this game, it's not just a mechanic that is showing that the fact that they're like losing their minds, but they're losing their minds and saying quotes that reveal their past. So the man at arms, for instance, he basically like cowered in the face of combat, and he left his allies, and that's something that he's consistently dealing with. So when you get further into the game and your character loses stress, and he like goes into madness, he'll start saying quotes about his past, saying I should have never left them behind or something like that. And I think that that is really cool in the sense that when you get farther and farther and you get to these points where your characters are starting to lose their sanity, when they do become virtuous instead of panicked, you really see them shine through saying like, I'm never going to leave my allies again. And then you get that rush of like, I can make it through this fight. I'm kind of on the back foot here, but then this character stepped up despite all his mistakes in the past and is showing that he can make it through this. Like that is to me the coolest part of Darkest Dungeon 2 and the protagonist. Same with like I forget his name, the Cutthroat, I think, was it?
The Highwayman, yes. And he does have a if you want to like say canonical name, it's not really, but Dismas.
Yeah, Dismas. So in 2, it's Dismas that you're playing as. You're not playing as just like the Highwayman. It is Dismas, right? And if you lose that run and you go back, you continue to play as Dismas. Like Dismas is your Cutthroat guy. I keep forgetting the titles. Highwayman. Yeah. So like Dismas, like his past is the fact that he did a job and then he ended up killing a family and he has to live with that regret because he's just like, this isn't what was supposed to happen. I was just supposed to.
Yeah. Oh, the comics too. The comics.
Yeah. Are gorgeous. So like, as I carry these characters through, especially in the system that Darkest Dungeon 2 implemented, I don't want them to die simply because I'm losing stats, but it's because I know that like Dismas kind of sees this as an atonement for his past. He understands why he's here, and that's why he's going to fight through it. You know what I mean? And I think that just brings so much more appreciation into those characters as opposed to something like Darkest Dungeon 1 where they were entirely replaceable. So seeing them like not only break and then quote the mistakes of their past, but when they get virtuous, you see them try to fight through that despite everything in Darkest Dungeon fucking with your head time and time again. Even when the characters are in the lobby, like in the checkpoint, so to speak, and they're resting before your next caravan journey, you'll see them kind of talk to each other about these experiences, which I think is just like the icing on top to make Darkest Dungeon 2 have some of my favorite protagonists in all of gaming. If not just that, the gameplay alone, like the fact that you are fighting these things and you're always on the back foot trying to figure your way out through like the worst situations possible and just trying to get that last inch to get towards the last part of the game. So Darkest Dungeon 2, highly recommend. It is an amazing game.
Yeah. I think I like the one's gameplay for me a little more. I know they're kind of similar in play, but I think I just need to like nut up and shut up.
And the narrator too. Did you hear about what happened? He recently passed away.
Oh fuck no!
Yeah, I'm not kidding. Yeah, the narrator from Darkest Dungeon, which I will say a lot of people had problems because of that, because they didn't like this guy kind of like weirdly, cornily talking through. But when you hear that guy talk in the game, especially when you're like the last like an inch from your life, and he's just telling you that like, you're not gonna make it out of here. This place is like a sinkhole of hope, right? And you're just like, God, man, like this is so down. But then you hear like somebody, like there's one quote, I think, when you get virtuous, it says, "This world takes many people, but not this one, not today." And I'm just like, fuck yeah, get in there. You know what I mean? Like
gets you fucking
like
going.
Yeah,
man.
Like that game just like consistently punches you down, and then you find your way out like through that little like hole through like the crack that has that light shining through it. And when these little moments where you manage to get through it, it's a lot like Monster Hunter where like you're like at the knife's edge, but in Darkest Dungeon it has this grittiness, this dread, this like darkness that really sinks you down, only to let you have the opportunity to push through. And that's what makes that game like probably one of my favorite games of all time. And the fact that they fleshed out the characters to take that role more in 2 is I think why I put them up there in my list, despite them not being like completely fleshed out characters, so to speak.
Yeah, they're really good archetypes in far as like gameplay terms. And then I think they have narrative depth there. Even if it is something that's told to you somewhat indirectly, right? It's not like they're narrating their whole story to you. But no, I mean, Darkest Dungeon's fucking great, I think. Just again, it's that human fighting spirit against the dark. Mike, you might be interested because it is Eldritch, like Lovecraft inspired, to the letter. And Wayne June, the narrator, actually did a lot of the audiobooks of H.P.
Oh, did he
Lovecraft's
really?
work.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's why they reached out to him, is because he was, I think that was a lot of his body of work was that sort of dark fiction. So I know he's like, just basic look, he did Edgar Allan Poe, he did H.P. Lovecraft. So it's why his manner of speaking is so in line with that.
There's
kind
one
of
line
genre.
where he enunciates like "destroy them all," and I'm just like, "Yo, we're gonna get through this, boys. We're gonna make it." Yeah, that game is terrific, man.
I've only played 2. I
Overconfidence is a
haven't played
slow
1.
and
so.
insidious
Yeah.
killer. It's-
Like, man, that game, like the stress is real. Like not just as a
Yeah.
gameplay mechanic, but for you, like the more you get into it, you're always thinking in the back of your head, am I safe? Is it good to keep going or should I back off? And you know that like that choice is never clear in that game. You never know whether
Yeah.
you should keep going or not.
It is really fun when you can like find the meme strats though, right? Like sending for like one especially is a lot of fun because you're not restricted to like one per play or one per like dungeon, right? If you want to do 4 Crusaders, just Holy Lancing, shuffling, you can, and it's a lot of fun.
Or like when you see your character at death's door and you're just like, no, come on, man, we gotta make it through. Like you're like half your crew's at death's door and you're just trying to keep them alive just to get that little bit farther. And you're like, I know if I make it past this point that I can either get to a fireplace or I can get to the caravan in the case of 2. Like it's always just urging you to keep going despite the odds. It is such a terrific game.
Yeah. Just the tank. The tension and then the relief and the grief that you get.
Incredible game.
Yeah, it's great. I think there's been criticisms of both, but one, I think there was like a lot of talk about like the grinding you need to do if you lose a character is sometimes really
I think they
annoying,
fixed that in 2, which is why I think I liked it a little bit more than 1.
Great choice though. That one I would have expected.
Yeah, and that's why I have such a hard
sure
time
we're
like
talking
trying to
about.
pick a protagonist, because when I think of these like more blank slate characters that like don't really have much meaning behind them, there's still a fondness to them. Like whenever somebody brings up Darkest Dungeon, I'm like, oh yeah, Leper and Mans at Arms, like that's what I run. And my boy Dismas, like it's yeah, they're not exactly like as deep as an ocean, but they hold a sentiment in your heart, because I think when you play that game, it really ties you to the party members you have, either through gameplay mechanics or the fact that you're just trying to continuously push to the next thing, and that like just innately ties you to a character because they're with you through that gameplay up to the point that they quite literally die. You know what I mean? If you fuck up.
So if I can pivot onto a blank slate here, that isn't a blank slate, and that's part of the so I would like to bring up the player character from the original Knights of the Old Republic game.
Ooh.
For Star Wars, right? So there's one really big twist. This shit's 23 years old now, or some change.
We've been
so if you don't
throwing
know it,
spoilers left and right for games that.
One last spoiler warning. In Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, it turns out your amnesiac player character has actually been the Sith Lord Darth Revan the whole time, who was captured by the Jedi and turned back into a Jedi. So Dan, I'll give you some context. Are you a big Star Wars guy?
I think Warhammer is the better.
He's a Star Wars
space.
hater.
Yeah, I'm actually quite
He's a hater.
Okay.
So the only experience I like about Star Wars is like the Battlefront games, because I played the shit ton of them.
Okay, no, that's real as fuck.
I lost half our listeners.
Not
because of Battlefront, because you're a Star Wars hater.
Without getting too far into it, I think that the aspects of like the Star Wars are way more interesting than like the Jedi versus the Sith. You know what I mean? Like I like the more foot soldier, the rebels going out on these operations to try to get more ground, as opposed to like fighting these droids that, you know, can be rebuilt
love Rogue
like
One.
nothing. Yeah, I mean, I actually did like Rogue One more than most of the movies. Like I like the world of Star Wars more than I do like the consistent push and pull of like these super strong, you know, Jedi and versus the Sith. I don't really care for that.
Both of you need to watch Andor.
I've heard good things. I've heard good things. Yeah.
Incredible drama, like even independent of Star Wars. If you like Star Wars, you're gonna love what it does with the universe. Even if you're not a big fan of Star Wars, but you can appreciate a good like drama. Oh my god, you'll love it. So give it a try. And Dan, it's one of those. That show is like it goes away from the Jedi and Sith and like good versus evil explicit.
I never finished The Mandalorian, but I did like it. Like for the couple of episodes that I watched.
So let's go back to KOTOR here. Just I'm gonna again give you some more context. So KOTOR does lean a lot heavily into the Jedi versus Sith thing, but it's on a much bigger scale because it's like ancient times, right? So there's more Jedi and there's more Sith, as opposed to like 3 heroes who are Jedi and everyone else is a fuck off normal red shirt, right? So like the ground wars are Sith and Jedi going against each other. And then you still have like the space battles and all that. So Knights of the Old Republic is set some 3,000 years before Phantom Menace, right? And it is set basically the backstory is the Republic is embroiled in a civil war started by the Jedi, specifically two Jedi. They eventually become Sith through other narrative shit. One of them is the most famous and probably most iconic. You've probably seen the mask in any Star Wars circle you've engaged with. It's Darth Revan, and then there's Darth Malak, who ends up being like the main antagonist of the game. So basically what they did is the Republic was being attacked by the Mandalorians, the ancient Mandalorians. They were a group of Jedi who were like, hey, we need to do something. They didn't have permission, but other Jedi agreed with them. So they went out and they fought a war. And then over the course of that war, it was a war. So they ended up doing things that were against the Jedi. They were kind of exiled and then ultimately fell to the dark side and became like the Sith, right? So they started their own Sith movement that began to attack and take over the Republic. So at the start of KOTOR, you're at the edge of that. The Republic is very much on the back foot, but you've just found out that they've managed to kill Revan, right? I think they present like that Revan was defeated by the Jedi Strike Team or something, or he's gone missing, or something like that, right? I need to play it again. It's been a few years since I touched it. But you basically wake up on a ship that's under attack by Sith, and you're not really given any chance to like explain your backstory or anything, and nothing is dictated to you beyond the fact that you're a Republic soldier on the ship. You have to try and escape the ship. You do. And then you have to try and rescue a Jedi who is a part of that strike team. So halfway through the game or so, you are captured by Darth Malak, and he reveals to you that you are Darth Revan, right? In this really like climactic scene, you are basically, over the course of it, you become a Jedi too, and you find out that it was a plot by the Jedi to kidnap you, brainwash you, and then have you lead them to victory. So at that point, he's like, yeah, they took advantage of you. So this whole time, you think you've been playing your own character in the Star Wars universe, but in reality, you've kind of been the bad guy the whole time. So it's a brilliant like reveal, and for its time, it was like revolutionary, right? Yeah, pretty incredible, right? And Star Wars is good with plot twists. I am your father.
Didn't they try to do the same with like the Force Unleashed games in a way where you find out that you're the apprentice of Darth Vader, like Starskiller or whatever?
Well, you're Vader's apprentice from the game.
Oh, do you?
Okay.
So,
yeah. So it's not really like a secret. The gameplay systems wise, it's the same as like any RPG. It's very much based off of like 3.5 D&D, I think, or 3rd edition D&D. So it's very similar to that. And that doesn't tie so much into your character as much as like the choices you make on the way. It is a more traditional CRPG in that regard, in that even up to that point, you can choose to be like good or bad, right? Like, light side or dark side, if you want to put it in the context of Star Wars. But just the fact that they add that gravity to your character, that you were this evil Sith Lord, and then you can either choose to like run with it and say, well, I'm going to reclaim my legacy now. Or, reject it and try and redeem yourself and defeat, what you had created. Such an effective way. It gives weight, and it's like a perfect call to action for your character.
In a way, it's giving you kind of like a backstory while also keeping you as like a blank slate character in a way.
Yeah.
It's basically saying you get to choose your own destiny despite this backstory given to you, and will you let that influence you or not?
Yeah, right? It's a second chance.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it.
So I think that's just the way the twist is done, and the fact that it's a Star Wars story, and like, again, you can put yourself in the shoes of Darth Revan, in that you still name the character. It's not named Darth Revan from the get-go. There's really nothing.
It's more titular than anything.
That's you. You were just also this important from the beginning, and you didn't even realize it. So it's a really cool thing.
I've got a question. With all the lore surrounding Darth Revan, did that come before or after KOTOR? Because I know there's like books about him. I've read one of them.
So KOTOR's debut was Revan's debut, to my understanding, right?
Okay. Gotcha.
Because this was that renaissance of Star Wars games that came with the prequels.
Yeah. Yep.
So everything after that came in the form of books. There was KOTOR 2, which is not about Revan. It's about one of Revan's like disciples. And then, of course, BioWare comes out with the Star Wars: The Old Republic MMO. And before that is when I think they release a handful of Revan novels, because you do actually get the quote-unquote end of Revan's story in that MMO, which isn't very
I was
good.
going to bring that up because I was getting under the impression that maybe I got confused. So Knights of the Old Republic isn't the MMO. That's the Old Republic.
That's the Old Republic.
Yes.
Oh, I
So
see. So KOTOR was its own game.
Yeah, KOTOR 1 and 2 are traditional single-player RPGs.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought that Knights
made
of the Old
by BioWare, the people who have done Mass Effect.
Okay,
and then
I thought
they
was
did
the MMO.
Yeah, in 2010, I want to say they did SWOTOR, which is Star Wars: The Old Republic versus Knights of the Old Republic, which is meant to be an overall sequel to KOTOR 1 and 2, but through an MMO lens, right?
I got you. Okay.
So I played a lot of SWOTOR. I'll be honest. Not being an MMO man, I think the writing was competent enough. There's
pretty solid
8,
from what I've heard, right?
8 like class stories that take you 1 to 60 or 1 to 50 or something like that. Some are better than others. I haven't done them all. I don't have the time for that, but and then there's like post game content, of course, too. So
I definitely like your choice of Revan / player character from KOTOR. I love KOTOR.
Yeah,
that's a game I play.
I
mean, you would hate
Warhammer on top.
I don't think. I think that's a type of game you would hate playing. Speaking of CRPGs,
Baldur's Gate.
I want to bring forth Astarion from.
Wait,
Baldur's
am I actually
Gate
right?
3. Yeah,
It's just
so there is a very amazing cast of characters in that game, and I love them all.
Yeah, Karlach.
They're all great.
Real.
There are 2 characters that are always in my party.
Wait. Before we get
Shadowheart.
Before we get into your massive love for Baldur's Gate, I just want to make sure that the audience knows that they are free to hate on me for not liking Baldur's Gate. I am one of the few people in this world that did not enjoy Baldur's Gate 3. So please feel free to jump me.
I tried.
I really
Chad,
did.
I
did. I really tried, and then I got crit by goblins like 5 times in a row, and I was like, this game fucking sucks. And I play Monster Hunter and Darkest Dungeon. Difficulty is not a thing for me, but Anyway.
So for me, I mean, Alex, you've played through Baldur's Gate.
I have indeed. Yep.
One thing I love about that game, I mean, the characters are the epitome of, deep as a fucking ocean, man. Just the fact that even on your first playthrough, you're not going to get like every single piece of character building. It feels like every playthrough I play, I get to know these characters more, and they say different stuff at different times, right? I mean, shit, just the way they interact with each other. Maybe your party composition is different than it was previously, and you're hearing different dialogue while you're walking that you've never heard before. Adds to the character. But Astarion in particular really, I thought, had a really great story and arc that he goes through the game as a victim of abuse, and seeing how that affected him, how he yearns to kind of grasp his the power on his own life, to kind of be free, but then also seeing him battle kind of going from victim to almost abuser, how he could easily fall into that path, because of the way he is a very well written way of I mean, it goes back to something like James, where he's a very gray character, leaning more towards a little bit evil, but the way he's written of you come to understand how he is because of what's been done to him and what's been taken from him, which could be a metaphor for multiple different things on abuse and such. It's very well layered, and how that affects him, how different dialogues and conversations you can have with him could either change his mind on things, or you can see things from his perspective. And I mean, the reason why I love Baldur's Gate is that you can play into his be the fucking vampire lord now and be a fucking total killer, and you can lean into that evil aspect, but you could also kind of rein him in and be no, you shouldn't be this guy, you know.
So I'm assuming you like didn't engage in his romance because you're not into
I have
dudes,
not.
right? Yeah.
Nah.
I didn't either, but I have a
I
lot of
ain't
friends
to
who did.
dudes. Yeah.
And it's like, as you said, it's scary how quickly he becomes the abuser. So Astarion's a very
Yeah.
interesting character in that regard, because if you let him ascend, and then you try and break up with him, he's like, "Are you fucking kidding me? No, I'm not allowed." Yeah, like seriously, it is like scarily
I mean,
abusive.
shit. Even like when you like first find out he's a vampire, right,
Mhm.
or a vampire spawn, where he's like about to drink your blood while you're sleeping without any sort of consent, and then you're like, what the fuck? And then he's like, well, can I have some? And it's like, what? No, fuck off. You know, like it's just like that's what makes him so good as a character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it's like he kind of plays that like kind of slightly evil that can turn into full evil, but then he's very not I wouldn't say like fully malleable, but you can affect the way that like
Mhm.
the way he changes throughout the game, you know.
So I have an interesting bit of information about Astarion, right? That so you know how with Shadowheart, right, one of the other companions, when she has her big like moment, you know, where she either like dedicates herself to evil or chooses to redeem herself or take herself
Yeah.
on a new path. That is dependent on your actions as a player, but she makes that decision,
Yep.
right? Astarion, I believe, if you just say do what you feel is right, if you're there with him when he's confronting his vampire master, he will always ascend, on one exception. If he is the only one who goes to confront his vampire master, and he is not the player character, as in you didn't choose him as the origin character, right? You split him off from the party, sent him there alone, and then, you know, played that fight without anyone else. He will choose to
That's
not
cool.
ascend. Yeah.
Interesting.
So
in a
only
way,
one
he's
other.
like his own being, basically, but
Yeah.
only around himself.
Yeah, it's a very interesting like dynamic there. That the fact that if the influence of the player is there and they leave him to his own devices, he will choose to like be selfish. But the moment that he's untethered from anyone else, he chooses to be selfless. Is like really, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's very cool to me.
Yeah, that seems pretty cool. I mean, I would have never gotten there because I immediately killed him at the beach because I didn't like him. Yeah,
and that's what makes Baldur's Gate great. Is
Yeah.
that you could totally do
Yeah.
that.
My Baldur's Gate playthrough was basically like kill Astarion at the beach, and then there was that green goblin lady that was trapped, and I told her to say please. Lae'zel, yeah.
Lae'zel.
I asked her to say
Yeah.
please. She said no, so then I lit her on fire, and then I was like, all right, where's Karlach? And then that's basically when I stopped playing. Yeah, Baldur's Gate does seem to have a lot of depth to it. I'll never take that away from the game, but you know, it's just not for me.
Yeah, I do find it interesting you put Astarion as a protagonist. I know as an origin character you can play as him, but
Yeah.
when I see the origin characters, I don't see them as playing them as a protagonist. I see playing them in lieu of a protagonist.
For me, when I was like searching on what like a protagonist meant,
Mhm.
like because I wanted to do a little bit of deep dive before this episode, I've come to understand that like it's not just like the main character. It can be like, you know, for example, in the Spider-Man animated movies that have come out recently, Gwen is a very major part of that story.
Mm-hmm.
She would be considered a protagonist.
Yeah.
At least to my understanding.
I think
Yeah.
there's
So
more specific terminology, like deuteragonist or something is usually the way that's phrased, but I guess what I mean, I
Okay.
understand what you're saying. I know Gwen is
Yeah.
more of a protagonist in the second movie
mhm.
than she was in the first. Like Miles was definitely the main character.
Yeah, he's the
first-
main character,
yeah.
but I would consider Gwen a protagonist.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, at least in my eyes.
No, I think
So,
that's a fair.
and
assessment.
I mean, what I mean for me, I think and why do I choose Astarion over the other characters? Even my beloved person that I romanced, Shadowheart. I mean, one major fact is Neil Newbon, man. All the
Oh,
voice
man.
actors are great.
I don't think
but
we've been talking
Neil,
about the
like,
voice actors enough.
No, for sure not. But for me, Neil is one that really stands
Mhm.
out. Man, that character, he really fucking took that as his own, and like, there is nothing like Astarion in anything I've seen. And for me, when I think of vampire now, I think Astarion. Like, I don't think of anything else. Besides maybe Dracula. But like,
Oh, Dracula's voice
for
actor.
me is yeah. I mean, don't get me started on that. But, Neil Newbon, like, man, just the range that he like displays with the range of Astarion, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But like everything, it's like this is so Astarion. Like you can see something and you're like, this is Astarion. Like, like it's crazy how much life he brought to that character.
Yeah.
And like I said, all of the voice actors do that, but for me, Neil is just a little bit of that step further.
Yeah.
So that is another major reason why I chose Astarion over some of the other
Fantastic. Yeah.
characters in that game.
I mean, it is a good choice. I think it's valid. I'm just in my definition of, like, if you ask me who are the protagonists of Baldur's Gate 3, right? I'd say it's either Tav, like the blank character, right, or the Dark Urge.
Yeah.
So, but
I get that.
But that's just my thing. I don't really like doing the origin style like experiences. But still, I think it's great to highlight him as a character who has a lot of narrative focus. I think, yeah, as you said, Neil Newbon sells.
You got
the
any
character.
other characters?
I wanna honorable mention Kiryu from Kazuma Kiryu from the Yakuza series, right?
A series I
because
really have to get around to playing.
I have
it's an
Yakuza
investment
0,
of, oh
so
my god,
I
it's
have
a
to
time.
play it, yeah.
Zero is incredible. If you play one game, play Zero. That is
Okay.
what I say about the Yakuza series, right? So the Yakuza games have a bunch of like characters you can call the protagonist. Hell, they have like the Like a Dragon games now, which has a completely new protagonist. But even if they're not about Kiryu, they're somehow about Kiryu, is what I've seen so far.
Yeah.
This is coming from someone who has not played every game, because I don't have time to play like 12 games. But even when at the end of Yakuza 6, I think, when they're like, all right, story's not about Kiryu anymore, he can retire. They then made another game where you play as Kiryu entirely. And then Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, there's a pretty big portion of the game where you play as Kiryu.
Is the guy with the silver suit and the red undershirt, right?
Yes, yeah. He is the main character, so to speak. So he hits a note I think we've all agreed on today. He's a dad character, and moreover, like, adoptive dad, right? So responsibility was kind of thrust upon him. In the first game you were introduced to Haruka, who becomes his surrogate daughter through the series, right? And so if you start from Zero, which came later in the series, right, you are pretty much watching Kiryu grow from a young man who has just joined his like Yakuza clan to a guy in his like late 60s, pretty much. And you experience like beginning, middle, end of that if you play the whole series. And he goes on a journey. And through that whole time, right, he always is just an incredibly charismatic individual, even though he isn't, like, he fits the himbo perfectly. He's kind of a blockhead.
Yeah.
But he's always willing to fight for his friends. He's incredibly like heartfelt and kind to people who need compassion. And he's just funny. He's really funny in like not a goofball way, but he can be oblivious to things, and that's kind of funny at times. As he navigates a world he's not really aware of. So just want to say he's a great character. It's really, really cool to experience his story. And if you guys should start with Zero.
I really
and
have to get around to it.
Yeah, they're great games. They have a lot of mileage in them, so you can play them for hours at a time. And like even the side content is the best part about Yakuza, hands
So
down.
I've heard
Stories are usually
you
good.
can become a Japanese idol, right?
Yeah, I think that's in like 4 or 5. And then, oh my god, the fucking disco minigame in Zero is so fun. You have no idea. You're gonna go into the disco club and you're not gonna want to do anything else. It's great. Also, the main combat gameplay is pretty fun. It's beat 'em up until Like a Dragon, where it becomes turn-based for some reason.
You become a pirate.
Yeah, that's Majima. You also play as Majima in Yakuza 0. He's one of the other like staple characters. He's the one who's wears that
in
like
the new game, right?
cobra skin jacket.
He's in the pirate one. Right?
He is the
one that just came
protagonist of
out.
the pirate game. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could call him a protagonist of the Yakuza series, but the real protagonist is Kiryu.
All right. Do we want to just run through whatever characters else or whatever other characters we have?
Yeah, I think we're coming close to the time limit. We kind of wanted to set ourselves up. So, I will go from him. I know said we wanted to talk a little more about Commander Shepard, but I think Commander Shepard is the ideal, like, perfect sci-fi main character in gaming, just because they kind of hit all the notes of, like, they're a space marine, they're a ship commander. They can fall in love with their crew and go on grand galaxy-saving adventures. The voice acting is incredible. It's I don't know. I want to say more about Shepard, but I know time is a thing. So
intergalactic breeding.
But
he's great.
Yeah,
I agree. He's amazing.
Shepard's great. You build great relationships over the course of it. You feel like a leader in Commander Shepard's boots.
I don't like Mass Effect.
Mass Effect's so good, man. You just great stories.
I hate Bethesda games. They're so bad.
It's not
BioWare. You know what I mean.
Dipshit.
I made that connection. I just don't like those kind of games.
Yeah. I got it. All right, Alex, what else do you have on your list?
So here's one that you don't really play as, but is most certainly a protagonist, is Captain Price from the Call of Duty series. I just think, like, from that era of action movie style shooters.
Yeah.
Really cool that was like the anchor character that drove all the narratives together. Voice actor, amazing. So
he's the one that got his knee shot off, right?
Price? I don't think so.
Wasn't there a game where, like, one of those, either Price or Soap, they're like in a wheelchair and they get their knee shot off during an interrogation?
Oh, you're thinking of the Black Ops games. That's completely different. Like, so this would be through the Modern Warfare line.
Yeah, well, I know that they're different storylines. I could have sworn that was one of those two guys, though. Never mind then.
Nah, but I think I'm really fond of I went through and replayed them, I think, a little earlier last year. And even though Call of Duty is what it is, right? That definitely was a peak of the franchise, and the writing wasn't bad. It was a very competent,
golden era.
Yeah.
Golden
era. Military drama. So if you look at it as that, it's fun. And then I have Jason Brody from Far Cry 3. I think this fish out of water type of character who then falls into, like, this
some deep shit.
Some deep shit,
yeah.
Magical tattoos, but also, like, explores the idea of, like, insanity and how the war he's fighting on that island pretty much by himself turned him into a psychopath that's just as bad as the characters he's facing. It's really interesting.
Amazing antagonist in that game also.
Oh, yeah.
I was trying to remember his name.
Voss,
yeah. Because Voss kind of acts like a mirror to him the farther you get into the game, doesn't he?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And then Voss dies and the game loses a bit of its steam.
I stopped playing it around there.
It's way worse.
Yeah.
I remember I stopped
It's still a
playing
great game. It's the only Far Cry game I finished.
Yeah.
Oh, I never finished it.
I have also beaten 4 and 5, and it doesn't match up to the the caliber of 3, I think.
Yeah.
The combat sandbox gets cooler in 4 and 5, but 3 felt like the most competent experience overall of the games I've played. So
anything else for you?
I have. What was the last one I had that I didn't talk about? It was, like, again, one of those blank slates. I just mentioned, I think Courier 6 from Fallout New Vegas is the best Fallout or, like, protagonist, but I know even that might be.
Yeah, it's crazy the antithesis that I am to you when it comes to gaming, because I just do not like Fallout, Skyrim, BioWare games.
That's all right, different perspectives. But I like Courier 6 because of I think they can be really funny. Just the way they're written is how you build their stats actually matters. So if you make your character a dumbass, they're gonna talk like a dumbass.
It's amazing.
And they are kind of a blank slate, but there is some mystery to their backstory that you learn about, and it's more compelling than just my dad or my child has gone missing in the waste. Better go find him. That's the other games kind of present. So
Okay.
You want me to go next?
I guess I'll.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a pretty lengthy list. I'll just run through them, and just give reasons why I put them on there. Just quick reasons. Dante from Devil May Cry. Really fun, funny, charismatic.
Wahoo Pizza guy.
Also amazing powers. Really fun to play as. Love him. Ryu Hayabusa from Ninja Gaiden. character that doesn't have a lot of personality per se, but he aura farms like a motherfucker. And also his like just playing as him, like his moves and move sets in that game are so gratifying, and it kind of, I know it's like through gameplay reasons, but I just love playing as Ryu Hayabusa. He's just the epitome of badass. Even though I haven't played too much of number 2, Henry from KCD, I love Kingdom Come Deliverance.
Yeah,
I think he's a great character.
I'll pin a small note. The design philosophy, Dan, for Henry was they just got a guy from like a regional English accent, and like a normal looking dude with a regional English accent. They're like, we want you to be the actor for this character because we want to represent the most generic dude possible.
That's cool as fuck.
Yeah. And so that's how Henry was made.
Yeah, and the way you get to shape like Henry and how he is and everything in that game is great, and surprisingly pretty well voice acted by that random dude.
Yeah.
And then I have 3 from Resident Evil: Jill, Leon, and Chris, the Holy Trinity.
Leon!
I think they are the Holy Trinity for Resident Evil for a good reason. I'm not going to dive into that franchise is,
yeah, all you have to know is Jill Sandwich.
Huge and everything. Yeah. But Jill, very resilient, very awesome and badass. Leon, seeing his growth from brand new cop to, international fucking president's agent, it's crazy. He's great. And then Chris, just, he's your muscle man, right?
Love Chris.
They're all awesome for their own reasons. Love playing them. I have Marcus and Dom from Gears. Fun fact, Gears of War is the first video game that made me cry, and that's because of what happens in Gears 3.
Yeah, I think that's a good reason.
Yeah, in Gears 3. Yeah, at fucking 14-year-old or 12-year-old me was not ready for that. And they're badass guys, but also like have some really cool like backstories and like characterization that happens throughout the franchise that I think is like honestly underrated when speaking about like protagonists from video games. Have Ezio and Auditore and Edward Kenway from Assassin's Creed. Ezio, I mean,
peak.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's just so like charismatic, but also like the story that happens like very like endears you to him and everything. And like for me, like when I think Assassin's Creed, you think Ezio.
Yeah.
Edward was kind of like a newcomer that kind of like made me fall in love with Assassin's Creed again. His game, the game he's in, is awesome, but then also his character in that game is a very good change of pace, and I really love him for that. Then I have some bangers from my childhood series. I'm gonna just list off Ratchet and Clank.
Very bold,
dude. I fucking love Ratchet and Clank. Honestly, they're probably in my top 5 of all time, which is funny. But Ratchet, very sarcastic, very kind of edgy, but not too much where you're just like rolling your eyes. And Clank, he's a little bit more like moderate, but then also like it's funny because they kind of play off of each other, where Ratchet is the organic being but doesn't have too much empathy or feelings, where Clank is the robot that was just newly minted robot that has more understanding and empathy than an actual living being does.
Yeah.
And them learning from each other and like complementing each other in different ways is amazing. At least for the first couple games, because they sanitize the hell out of those characters.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So yeah, unfortunately, because if you play through the first couple games, man, they are nothing how they are now. Sly Cooper from Sly Cooper. Holy shit. Dude he's just the epitome of cool, like, God, I love playing as him. He is like just so awesome to like, he just like oozes like not only aura but like drip and everything. And like just oozes like you just feel cool playing as him, and like the game kind of emphasizes that with like how I guess the world reacts to how you play as him, and in the story and everything, like with him and his interactions with, I think her name is Carmelita, or her name is Carmelita. Just very charismatic character that is always fun to play with. And then I'm gonna go Jack and Daxter from the Jack series. Duo, another amazing duo. Even though Jack doesn't speak in the first game, he still has like a little bit of a personality, but they changed that in 2 very drastically. And unironically, 2 is the most people love it because it's kind of like GTA light. But like Jack, the changes he has as a character, and just playing him with his like dark eco self, and then later gets a light eco, I guess, transformation and everything. Amazing, very well versed. I mean, Naughty Dog has a very amazing history of creating characters that are very well beloved, and games that are very, very well beloved. And I hope they bring Jack and Daxter back at some point. But next one, Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy. Don't really have to say too much of that. When you think Protagonist, he's probably in a lot of people's top 10.
Yeah, definitely.
Or just if you're gonna do a generic gaming top 10 protagonist, he's probably in that top 10 there. Joel and Ellie from Last of Us, we already spoke about that. I have Fane and Los from I think it's pronounced Los from Divinity Original Divinity Original Sin 2. Losa in particular, her story is very interesting and very cool. Kind of almost speaks a little bit to what to certain aspects of Astarion in a way.
Yeah. Love her.
Amazing. And then Fane is kind of that quick-witted, smart ass, but also has a really cool backstory that I love.
Yeah.
Those 2 are my go-to characters in that game. Zagreus from Hades. I love Zagreus. And even though he's kind of, I don't want to say one note, but he's kind of got the same tone throughout the whole game, right? With the way he speaks and everything, he still has like a very interesting characterization, and the way the world he fits into that Greek, mythology world. The way they wrote him, fucking awesome. I think it's Supermassive that made that game, right? That's the studio. Yeah, he's written very well. Also amazing to play as. And then I guess I'll shout out some. Dan, go ahead and go with your list.
Yeah. So, my list isn't very long, as is pretty evident from the fact of this video. All right, so the most important is Hatsune Miku. No, I'm just kidding. from the game Project Diva. No. So Alex kind of touched on it earlier. Won't go too far into it, but Isaac Clarke from the Dead Space series is just fucking, he's the GOAT.
Yeah.
Man, like I in my general life try to be a very resourceful person, and Isaac basically using engineering tools to get past everything that he did in the game is probably like the thing that resonated with me the most. In the first game, him grabbing just like a regular engineering plasma cutter, and the second one using the plasma cutter that's like a medical tool. Like it's all just really cool for him to see like engineering weapons and kind of put them into use to dismember people, or well, not people, but necromorphs. Because I mean, that's all engineering and construction tools are for, right? Is punching holes through walls, so why not punch a hole through a human thing, So yeah, Isaac is definitely up there for me. Another one, this one is, so I think that this is kind of a testament to a good character, is one that I kind of don't remember much about, but is still always a character that I hold near and dear, which is Subject Delta from BioShock 2. And his story is kind of, yeah, right?
Okay.
Because
deep cut, all right.
When you play a Subject Delta, it's kind of like, if I remember BioShock 2 correctly, it's been fucking years since I played it. But the whole premise of Subject Delta is the fact that he's like somebody who kind of has control over himself, but not really. Like he's kind of has a predestined fate. But what the BioShock series is really known for is the fact that you get to make your own decisions. And it's kind of this idea of like, you are in a way a slave to the world that you're in, but Subject Delta is like the perfect kind of guy that's breaking apart from that and trying to make his own route in life. That sounds just about right, Alex?
So I played BioShock 2 the least, so I'm gonna take your word for it.
Did you not enjoy BioShock 2?
It didn't catch me as so. I think I had issues with the BioShock franchise, just not meeting the standard I was set for. So I think the narrative. I started with Infinite, I think.
Oh well, that's not great. Yeah,
I know. So the narrative at Infinite reeled me in more than the actual gameplay. The gameplay at that point, I was like, "Oh my god, this sucks." The shooting was really mediocre. I didn't like the whatever they were called, the vigors or whatever.
Yeah.
And I played BioShock 1, and I'm like, this is better, but
BioShock 2 is like
Yeah.
everything that's good about BioShock 1 that is just like oozing with environment, and then the more modern gameplay mechanics of Infinite. It's like I think BioShock 2 I think is a game that is unfortunately I don't even want to say it's like overshadowed. It's just that BioShock 1 is so iconic that a lot of people just kind of looked at BioShock 2 and they were like, "Oh, okay, it's not BioShock 1 or whatever." And then they immediately
yeah.
hopped in Infinite because it was like a new thing in the BioShock
Hmm.
series. But 2, man, like the one thing that always got me about 2 is the fact that you're kind of like you're the way that the big daddies and everything work is the fact that they're pair bonded with something else, right? And you're always
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
find like your sister, so to speak, is the objective of the second game. But
Hmm.
there's a song in the beginning. I think it's in the intro of the game called Pair Bond. It's called Pair Bond. If it's like probably I think one of the most iconic pieces of OSTs ever. Um, and I'm like a big soundtrack guy, and Pair Bond has never been a moment where I listen to that song and I don't feel like the idea of what BioShock is supposed to be, which is kind of like this tragedy that happened in this city that was supposed to be a utopia. And I think Subject Delta as a character is the one that encapsulates that the most by being a again like kind of like a slave to the system that he was brought up in, but even then kind of trying to break free of those chains and get to his end goal, which is caring for his pair bond sister. It's just an incredible fucking game through and through. Um, the I guess it's kind of like the last character really because I don't have much to speak on it. And this is kind of going back to like the that blank slate archetype is this is kind of more of an excuse to talk about this game, but I really do like the sentiment of this character. Who's just called the Wanderer, and he's from Shadow of the Colossus. I think one of the best games ever created. Like,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, like to put it in perspective, this character is so like watered down that the horse has a name, Argo, right? But the character is just called the Wanderer. Um, and the idea behind Shadow of the Colossus, like a lot of the games that I tend to enjoy, is a character who just has a sword and a horse that's supposed to bring down these ancient beings that are like 100 times his size. And the idea, like I think the again back to the OST thing, one of the songs in that game is called "The Way Through" or "Breakthrough" or something of the sort.
Hmm.
And it happens when you're starting to get to the top of the Colossus. It's this like swelling of orchestra, and then it brings it back down to this kind of like faster paced strings, and then it breaks back up to this, and it kind of encapsulates the idea of like a way through of you just being this guy who has to figure out how to get on top of these colossi and bring them down. Um, and the game does not hold your hand whatsoever. It's just like here's this giant thing, figure it the fuck out, right? Um, all of which to say that at the end of the game, your very objective of trying to save the girl in the altar is brought to nothing, and then your character is just killed off, and you just realize that like you've brought down these insurmountable tasks for then nothing to happen except for your trust to be betrayed by like an otherworldly being. And I think like every moment that you go through is just another moment where you're like faced with an odd that you don't think you can solve, and when you get to it and you figure it out, you're just like so blood pumped, and like the whole thing is filled of adrenaline, even though it's just kind of like a climbing simulator for the most part. But that game again just oozes atmosphere. It's like not an intense twitchy fast game, which are the ones that I tend to like, but it's one of those games that just like highlights this world that just feels barren, but at the same time feels like desolate in the sense of something like Elden Ring, where it feels like something else was lived in here. And even though there's not a lot of exploration like something like Elden Ring, there's a lot of times I found myself in that game just acting like a little hero going around this giant field trying to say like what this world is about, and that made me relate to the character even more as just like a dude who has to bring down giant things. But that's really all the only ones I have. I mean, like one that I'm kind of surprised we didn't talk about, and I don't even hold him up to that regard, but like, I know a lot of people do, is Kratos. Um, but at the end of the day, I kind of liked his older games where he was just a mad
Yeah,
demigod.
same.
So
Same.
yeah, but I know a lot of people like that, so I'll just throw in Kratos in there and say that's
Yeah,
it.
Yeah.
so I do have a small list of like general characters that we didn't have on our list, or at least to my knowledge, we didn't have on our list. Arthur Morgan and John Marston from the Red Dead Redemption series. No, well beloved. Don't be mad at us. Sorry. Lara Croft from Tomb Raider. Link from Legend of Zelda. Agent 47 from Hitman. probably honestly should have been on my list. Solid Snake from Metal Gear, Mario from Mario.
Yeah. All safe
Gordon
choices, I
Freeman
think.
from Half-Life, Nathan Drake from Uncharted, Kratos from God of War, Terra from Final Fantasy VI, Cecil from Final Fantasy IV,
That's the Dark
Crash
Knight, right?
Bandicoot from Crash. Yeah, he's the Dark Knight. Turn Paladin. And then Leon / Squall from Final Fantasy.
I like how you put Crash Bandicoot to break up all the Final Fantasy games there. That
Yeah,
really
exactly.
So I do think, in our defense, right, we are listing characters that we like. This isn't
that to our yes, exactly.
We're not here to break
just
down every video game
exactly.
protagonist. This is like these characters spoke to us, or these characters we love. And I know we have more that we'd like to talk about, but for the interest of keeping it in a timely manner, I think we should start going towards the wrap up. Mike, do you want to talk about the socials again? And
yeah, so you can find us on pretty much any major social media with the tag the Bonfire Nexus. Yet again, you can also email us at thebonfirenexus@gmail.com. Send any questions. We'll probably consider maybe doing a mailbag section if we get a significant portion and find any like questions or topics that'd be cool to talk about that you guys recommend or want to know or ask us. For what we're planning right now, we're planning on just having a couple episodes or having our episodes focused around some main topics like the one today, where it would be fun to kind of just dive into things like of the past or things that like we really love and speak to why we love them or why we don't like them. And we just thought it'd be fun to create a community and stir up some conversation on things like that. So yeah, well, I appreciate everybody who listened to this episode, and I will say this: any feedback's great. I would love to have some feedback and stuff. So
yeah, we'll get a formal grievance form out at some point.
Yeah, for all my disgusting takes.
Yeah.
Not liking Baldur's Gate. I'm sorry.
Can't believe Dan hates BioWare games.
Oh my goodness.
All right, and I think that wraps it up. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks again.
Ciao, ciao.
Good night, everyone.